Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming to this planning meeting. Just want to run through a few formalities with you. There are no planned fire drills during this meeting. If we hear the fire alarm sound, we treat it as if it's a real emergency, evacuate the building via the nearest safe escape route, which is the signposted set of stairs to the left as we leave the council chamber or the public gallery. The exits by the back door. Yes, we do require silence really when we're talking. It does reverberate around, even though you think you might be having a private conversation. It does make a difference. The acoustics are a bit sensitive in here. So yeah, ideally it's nice to be quiet. So the door is at the back of the building in the car park. You walk across the inner car park, around the building to the evacuation point, which is a pavement opposite the police station and the high street. Obviously, the lifts can't be used in the event of an emergency. Please don't re-enter the building until you're advised it is safe to do so by a council member of staff. I would ask that mobile phones are switched off or turned down during this meeting. I would also request that all participants use the microphone so that we can be heard both online and in the room. Also request that no food is consumed. I'm not quite sure what that rule is for, but unless there is a medical need. Of course, members of the planning committee will not be able to leave the council chamber during the presentation or debate on an application. If they leave, they will be unable to vote on that application. I'd like to remind members of the public, both in the room and watching virtually, that they are present purely to observe the process and will not be permitted to speak unless they have registered to speak in advance. Just to explain the lighting system we have here, when you're asked to speak, the green light will display. When there are 30 seconds remaining, the amber light will display. When the red light displays, I will stop you talking. This is to ensure that all parties receive the same amount of time and that the process is seen to be fair. Thank you. Perfect timing. Thank you. Hey, I'd like to then just I'd like people to introduce themselves, please. I think for the benefit of those who are watching online, it's better if they hear and see your voices and who you are. So can I ask members of the committee, the councillors and members of the committee to first introduce themselves, perhaps starting with Councillor Aldridge. Could you start us off?
The little voices. Okay.
If I may, I think we need to let them all boot and then for people to turn them off, because otherwise, if we have more than 3 on, it doesn't seem to work at all.
Yeah, Councillor Ian Ward. I'm the ward councillor for Sandown South.
Councillor Chris Quirk, ward councillor for Shanklin South.
Peter Spink, ward councillor for Freshwater North and Yarmouth.
Martin Oliver, ward councillor for Mountjoy and Shide in Newport.
Chris Jarman, ward councillor for Totland and Cornwall.
Warren Drew, councillor for Ryde South East and vice chairman.
Claire Richardson, councillor for Chale, Knighton and Shorewell.
Vanessa Churchman, councillor for Haylands and Swanmore at Ryde.
Jeff Brody, councillor for Pan and Barton in Newport.
Debbie Andre, councillor for Sandown North.
And I'm John Medland, and I'm the Councillor for Freshwater South and the Chairman of the Planning Committee. Thank you all very much. Can I ask the other participants and staff perhaps first to introduce themselves and the other participants? Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Ollie Bolton. I'm Strategic Manager for Planning and Infrastructure Delivery.
Hi, I'm Sarah Wilkinson and I'm Planning Team Leader.
Stuart Van Kynenberg, Principal Planning Officer.
Neil Shranken, Development Control Manager at Island Roads.
And I'm Ben Guard, Legal Advisor for Planning Committee.
And I'm Marie Bartlett, Democratic Services Manager.
And I'm Paul Fuller. I'm the Cabinet Member for Planning and Enforcement. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for the introductions. I think that's everything I need to say for the moment. I think we'll move on to the agenda itself now. I'd like to ask Ms Bartlett if we have any changes to membership of the committee this one.
Chairman, we have apologies from Councillor Adams and Councillor Ward is substituting for Councillor Price today.
Thank you. We are now looking at the minutes of the meeting of July 26th. Can I have a proposal? These are, thank you, Councillor Quirk. Do I have a seconder for that? Thank you, Councillor Oliver. Are we all agreed that the minutes are a true record of last meeting? Thank you very much. Are there any declarations of interest on items on the agenda? Yes, Councillor Quirk.
6 or 7 years ago, DN Associates and David Norval did some work for me, so I do know him, but I don't regard it in any way conflicting.
Councillor Spink.
Yes, in relation to the second application, Elm Lane, there is an objection on behalf of the West White Villages Residents Association, dated December 2020. That was before I was a member of Planning Committee, and I drafted that objection and signed it. So I think on that basis, whilst I take the view I could approach it with an open mind, viewed objectively, it might be said that I'm predetermined and therefore I won't sit on that application.
Thank you, Councillor Spink. Are there any other declarations of interest? Item is public question time. Do we have any? We don't have any questions from the public. So we move on from there, I take it. Oh, are there any people, does anyone in the gallery like to ask a verbal question? No? Thank you. Okay. Sorry. Now we move on to the report of the Strategic Manager, Planning and Infrastructure. So over to you. This is going to be Stuart. You're going to be presenting the first of the items. That's the Ryde terminus. So just to introduce, this is the application for Ryde Esplanade Railway Station, the Esplanade Ryde.
Thank you, Chairman. The application relates to Ryde Esplanade Railway Station. I'm just circling that in my cursor, and you can see it marked with the red arrow. To north is Ryde Pier, the promenade pier being listed. And then we have the tramway pier and the railway pier, which continues inland. To the west is Western Gardens, and to the east is the actual railway line and the hovercraft terminal. The application site pretty much is the confines of the station buildings. So again, the railway is actually forming the eastern boundary. The pier access road is forming the western boundary. For members, just a reminder of the appearance of the current Ryde Esplanade station. This is looking from the pier, as we have the north elevation as it exists at present. Looking from the pier access road, that's the western elevation. Looking from the Esplanade to the north, you can see the existing entrance. Again, the pier access road is over here. And this is taken from the footbridge to the east. So again, we can see the current station building from the eastern aspect. The application seeks refurbishment of the station. The application is before members primarily because of the external alterations, which I'll come on to in a minute. But in terms of the general refurbishment scheme, we would see a new weather screen here. So these walls to the west would be removed, and new weather screen and glazed frontage would be provided along the western and southwestern facade. There would be a new entrance here, and the circulation space would be expanded northwards to link up the tramway pier, which is to be refurbished as a pedestrian link to Ryde Pier Head under a separate listed building centre application. The general refurbishments would provide new refurbished public toilets as compensation for removal of the toilets on the Esplanade of Western Gardens. There would be enhanced facilities for South West Railway and Southern Vectis in terms of office and ticket hall facilities, waiting facilities and staff amenities. This is the existing retail block. This is the information office for Southern Vectis at the moment. That would also be retail. And a large cafe concession would be provided here, which is, and then there would be some seating along here as part of that. Where effectively the pedestrian link through to the north of the railway of the pier would be. In terms of external alterations, the main change members will note this is existing, this is proposed. We're looking at the main southwest elevation as we would approach it from the Esplanade. So they would see that there's a new glazed entrance feature that at the moment rises about ½ a metre higher than the highest point of the railway station at this point here. There would be some roof modifications, so part of the canopy along here would be removed. To the left of where the current retail concession is. And there would be a new parapet lean-to roof that would be configured over the top of where effectively the new cafe would be. And again, you can see where the low wall and glazing, and that would be continued along the western side where the weather screen would be. And there would be some minor modifications to fenestration, including infilling for a bin store here, where it's currently an opening, and some minor modifications to fenestration along the eastern part of the building there. Taking a look at the elevation from the pier access road, again, this is where the walls would largely be demolished, and that would provide a much more glazed frontage with a westerly aspect. There would also be some roof modifications at this point here, where the flat roof would be modified to a lean-to parapet roof. And again, you can see the aspect from the pier access road of the new entrance. Looking northwards, this is as we look at it from the pier. There'd be a slight enlargement of the building footprint. It's ever so minor. There'll be a little infill here, and the roof would be extended up to this point here, as you can see here. There would be an opening up of these walls here, which effectively would create a new entrance exit point into the railway station. This glazing here is actually westward facing, although it's just the way the elevation has been drawn. That's the new weather screen elevation. And then this is just the east elevation. So this is looking towards the current Southern Vectis information as we were looking at it from the current bus depot. And so there's very minor changes there in terms of fenestration. And this is looking from the railway. So this is the back elevation of the railway station buildings. Again, that's fully remaining the same. There's no fenestration changes as you would look at it from the railway station. Just some 3D modelling. So again, this is taken looking towards the pier access road, and this is existing. And then this is the new elevation here from the west, the glazed western elevation, and the new entrance from that aspect. And you'll see where the canopy has been removed through here. And again, just looking at it from the Esplanade elevation, and then taking a look at the aspect from the railway elevation. That's it, members.
Thank you, Mr. Greenberg. Mr. Chandler, were you able to give a presentation on behalf of the Isle of Wight Council?
Hopefully that is working now. Yes, I'm Stuart Chandler, the Highways and Transport Client Manager for the Isle of Wight Council and representing the applicant in regards to this application. It's worth being aware that this application only concerns the station. However, it's a part of a much larger project which not just covers Ryde in this section of the Esplanade, but extends back into Portsmouth, and it's a part of a £10 million scheme for Ryde, but an overall package of about £56 million for the Portsmouth City region. And that's based upon the funding from the Department for Transport for the Transforming Cities Fund. The design delivers the replacement cafe and public toilets and the required link to the new pedestrian pier that extends north from the station up along the old tramway pier in between what is currently the promenade pier, shared with pedestrians and cars, and the railway pier, which is currently being worked on by Network Rail. This will enable an entranceway directly into the station from that tramway pier and enabling a direct walk-through to anyone accessing the ferry services or wishing to access the pier itself. The design delivers have also added value by opening up the station to let in more natural light and tidying up the facade and adding an entrance feature which is missing at present. But of course, there is one entrance into the station which will be blocked up as a part of this proposal, which would be between the current information office for Southern Vectis and a retail unit. The Isle of Wight Council is working closely with all partners, South Western Railways and Network Rail and other interested parties on this particular project, ensuring that it runs through as smoothly as possible. Obviously, as you're aware, there's a lot of work going on in that area at the moment, and this will be a further phase of those overarching works. Unfortunately, it's just worth reiterating again, this is a refurbishment rather than a complete redevelopment of the site. Unfortunately, the funding awarded wasn't of a scale in which could fund a full replacement, but it certainly builds upon what is existing and ensures it enhances those historic elements within the station that still remain, the ironwork and so forth, and the entranceway to the main elements of the Victorian structure, which are onto the station facing the platform facing the side of the station itself. And again, where possible, making most of those heritage and enhancing, opening them up where they've currently been covered by temporary ceilings and so forth, and exposing the ironwork. The entrance feature tries to mirror the pitch roofs of the local area, again bringing in light, and to help the visitors navigate, it is an entrance point to the station and to the wider interchange, especially from Union Street. The elevation as you come down facing the side from Union Street will be a link to going directly out as a more walkways and pedestrian area leading you directly into the station. So again, with that feature at the front of the building, it presents more of a gateway approach to that site. Although there's been concerns about some antisocial behaviour design, design is an improvement with more open spaces and better lines of sight, restricting in some cases those closed corridors which can be out of sight, and increases the footfall direction through the site itself. At the moment, you would only be walking through the station to actually gain access to the platforms or the waiting area. This will have that direct link straight through the site itself. Obviously, we would like to have done more, but as I said, the grant funding requirements and the funding limits have meant that we've not been able to go as far as we would like to or previously proposed for that location. However, the design has been informed by a regional community tour that was held early on in the stages of the development that I was involved in prior to funding the bid and the bid being announced. And relevant feedback during the public consultation has been taken into account during informing this design. I won't say any more on that, and I hope that is enough for. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chandler. Can I remind the public to, oopsie daisy, here we go again. I just remind the public in the public gallery not to talk. We can hear very well even the mutterings down here because it's strange, but the acoustics work. So please don't talk while we're having the meeting. Thank you. Right, I'd like to open this up to the members now to first of all to ask any questions if there's anything that's still not clear, and then or to make any proposals. Thank you, Councillor Quirk.
Currently, if you get off the train at Ryde Esplanade, the impression is, well, it's close now, but the impression is functional rather than historical or heritage. What's going to be done to give it more of a heritage feel as it's a heritage asset?
Thanks, Councillor Quirk. The RSA is ultimately the application before us in terms of what requires planning permission is purely for external alterations. There is, through the use of materials, we will be agreeing the actual colour scheme, if you like, for the external alterations. And that has been reserved by planning condition. The applicant is currently working through with South Western Railway in terms of their heritage guidelines for those colours. And ultimately, my understanding is that the actual colour scheme itself will reflect the heritage nature of the building.
Is there another question?
The one thing that sort of doesn't seem very heritagey is the glass doorway as you come in, which could become heritagey if they just use something that resembles cast iron to do it with. Is there anything plans, or is that given that it is as it is on the plans?
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. We have assessed it as it is on the plans. The Conservation Officer has also reviewed it, and our view is that given the nature of the building as it is at present, which has been harmed over time with various alterations and adaptations, that the design as it is presented in the plans is acceptable from a conservation perspective.
So we're not improving, we're just allowing it to just be bad because it's already bad.
Thank you, Mr. Quillenberg, for the answers. Councillor Churchman.
Yes, when I looked at the plan, I thought, what a lovely looking building, but in the wrong place. I can't see how that sits on a Victorian, deliberately kept Victorian esplanade. I thought the glass bit on the top was literally like a sore thumb sitting up in the air. On page 16, you talk about the removal of one of the pillars. Well, the station is Victorian. I thought it came in a conservation area. How come that we're removing what are, to me, heritage pieces? It is a Victorian esplanade. It is a Victorian station. Why on earth aren't we keeping it as such? How much input have had English Heritage or our officers had into the design of it? Because I just, I'd like to know how much input has come in, please.
Thank you. Thanks, Councillor Churchman. Planning officers haven't had input in terms of the design of this before the application was submitted. I believe that Historic England have had input in terms of the overall project. I think members might recall that we presented some of those comments back when we considered the public toilets, at which point Historic England did refer to how this building had been denuded of its historic features. To answer your question about why the column is being removed, the column is actually a later 60s addition. It is not a Victorian pillar that's being removed.
Thank you. Yes, Councillor Churchman.
I had a couple of other things. Toilets. I'm concerned. Most railways now are running their stations without any form of ticket office. It's all going to be machine operated, and I'm sure this will happen there. I'm very concerned about when the toilets will be opened. Has there been given any guarantee of the length of the day, and also who will be there to, when I say look after them, we know what the vandalism that has occurred at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Again, the application is only for the external alterations, so the planning remit does not extend to the internals of the site or how it is operated and managed. You know, that will be a wider question, obviously, for the operator of the station and the council as a whole. But in terms of this planning application, you know, the precise nature of when those toilets would be open is beyond what is being sought here, which is predominantly for the external alterations to the building itself.
Councillor Churchman, yes.
I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure that's good enough. Those toilets are the most used on the Isle of Wight. Ryde is a gateway, which is why it's called a gateway and an interchange. I think if we don't stipulate somewhere about the toilet facilities, we are going to have real problems later. Thank you.
Is there, Ms. Kuenberg, is there something like some sort of condition that could be attached to this in any way?
I would advise that the planning conditions need to be tied to the development itself. The development is for the external alterations. That is why planning permission is required, and therefore I would advise that the condition would not be directly related to the development that's before the committee. And from my understanding, just you know, I believe that the public toilets that are that were demolished were not regulated by planning in terms of their opening hours.
Thank you. Councillor Jarman.
Thank you, Chair. A few questions. I'll seek your indulgence if I may. And sorry to come back to the issue of toilets again. Could we, and I'm very pleased, first of all, to see the detail here, which is very useful because we didn't have this level of detail, I think it was in the past, particularly how the internals of it and how it's going to be organised. And, you know, with respect to what the planning officer said about it's only concerned with the external element, we do here have internal issues which are being changed as well. So I think they're part of the same application. So one of the questions I have is, with the toilets, will they be free at the point of use? And you know, they are replacing toilets which were previously in a different location outside of this. I think it's very important that local people know that they have toilets which are free to use as a replacement, albeit inside the building.
Okay. My simple answer is I don't know whether they'll be free or not, and we would advise that that's beyond the planning remit and this application.
So we don't know.
Would you like to make another one, Councillor
Yeah.
Jarman?
So the next question I have is the new entrance, which is directly onto the pedestrian access at the north end of the building, where we've got the new entrance there. Is that at the same level as the pedestrian walkway which goes up the pier? I couldn't see from the plan the actual elevations within the site.
My understanding is there will be some minor modifications to the station building to provide level access. So there will be level access through from the pedestrian tramway pier through the station building to the esplanade.
The reason I ask is that there was previously a question about the level at which the pedestrian route along the pier was being put. I believe it was from Councillor Churchman in a previous discussion, and the concern was that at a flood tide, the pedestrian route would be underwater. And if the north entrance is at the same level as that pedestrian level, then it too would be underwater at that time. Question mark.
Do we know anything about that, the flood level?
If the answer is I don't know, I'll take it. I don't know.
We don't know. Ultimately, yeah, the ultimate, it's at the same level as the current, it will be level access or whatever the current level is of the station building. And flood risk is covered in the report in terms of the level of flood risk to the station building, which as members will see is fairly low risk being in flood zone 1.
Councillor Jarman, do you have another question?
Yes, I find that answer quite disconcerting, but to move on, the other question I had is, if it is at the same level as the pedestrian walkway, which will go up the pier, the previous question, I think also perhaps from Councillor Churchman, was that that pedestrian walkway was being placed at a level which was slightly below the road. So the entrance out of the north entrance, the new entrance, would also be slightly below the pier road access. Is that correct?
Again, I don't know. Their scope is within the building, ultimately.
Planning application for the pier hasn't come in, has it? So you don't know where they're going to put it.
No, it was more of the flooding issue. I was worried about the level, about what the actual level of a flood tide was at that
I'll
point.
just explain what Councillor Quirk said. This is an interesting work. It's complicated because there's several applications to do with several different parts of this project, isn't there? So we've looked at the road set on the outside, but we haven't yet looked at the pier, so we haven't got that information, all the information yet. Councillor Jarman, do you want to continue?
No, not at the present time. Thank you.
Ask Councillor Speak. Will speak next.
Thank you, Chair. I share the concerns of Councillors Quirk and Churchman about the appearance of the outside of the station. It just seemed to me that we're missing an opportunity to enhance the appearance. I appreciate that it's a limited budget, but it doesn't necessarily cost any more to build in a period style than in a modern style. I find it hard to understand how it can be said that it's consistent with DM2 and DM11, which is that the council will support proposals that positively conserve and enhance the special character of the island's historic and built environment. Given that this is in a conservation area, can you point out any features that enhance and conserve the special character of the conservation area? I find it hard to see any.
Scullenberg.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application before us is what we have assessed. So whilst I appreciate members may have their comments in terms of whether things can go further, I would just remind members that we are determining the application is before us and the alterations that are proposed. In terms of the alterations and the historic elements, I just remind members that ultimately this element here is what is mainly being changed. That is a later part of the building. It's not part of the Victorian building. The building itself has been significantly adapted since Victorian times. And it is our view, having taken advice from the council's conservation officer, that this glazed elevation through here will be an enhancement to this existing building. We also consider that when you consider this building in a wider context and Esplanade, when you actually have the Hovertraver building and more functional buildings on the north side of the Esplanade, that actually this is relatively in keeping with transport related buildings. And therefore we do consider that it's appropriate in terms of the building that it would sit on. And we also consider that it is a relatively innocuous element. It's not much higher than an existing station building. Materials will help tie it into the wider building itself. And having considered views into and around the building, we feel that the additional height and bulk that that element would provide would not significantly disrupt views of the listed buildings on the southern side, or be significant in views in and around the conservation area.
I may follow that up, please. The Ride Society has made an objection. They say that the conservation area is on the Historic England at Risk register. What quite does that, can you help me? I'm not that familiar with the Historic England at Risk register. Would a building which doesn't enhance the conservation area, would that put it at greater risk? How does that register work?
Thanks. Normally the at-risk registers do identify heritage assets that are at risk, generally where there have been alterations in the past that have not preserved or enhanced them. Ultimately, my answer to that would be that when we are dealing with conservation areas and we are looking at planning applications, the test is preserve or enhance. So I would argue that is, maintain the status quo or better ultimately. And that would be my advice to members in terms of the test that you would need to apply in terms of the design and appearance of this structure.
If I may, Chairman, just to assist possibly.
Oh,
Thank you very much. I've just asked, Stuart to put the photographs up of the existing building, because I think that's important as a baseline. So what we are looking at in terms of assessment is whether the proposal enhances that building. Although that building sits within the conservation area, I think what is important is that is the current situation. We're not looking at a blank site. We're looking at an existing building, and the proposals are seeking to improve that, both in terms of pedestrian connectivity and links to the new tramway pier. So what we're doing is balancing the enhancements to the facilities within the building to the proposed external alterations, and whether those external alterations enhance the character of that building in that setting, opposed to yes, it may possibly be able to go further, but we're looking, does it enhance, does it conserve and or enhance? And that's, I thought it might be useful to have photographs of that, the existing building, up for reference. Thank you, Chairman.
And that's very useful. And Councillor Drew, you wanted to speak next, I believe.
Thank you, Chair. I was just wondering, in relation to the new entrance and exit on the northwest side that's replacing the blocked up exit, what consideration in terms of pedestrian safety has been made? I have a slight concern that it seems on the plans, maybe it's perhaps not reflected in fact, but that it's a little bit closer to the access road to the pier, whether there's the potential for young children, for example, to run out in utilising that new access, notwithstanding, I appreciate it's got better sight lines, but I wonder if you could perhaps go to that point. Thank you.
Gullenberg.
Thank you, Councillor Drew. I've just pulled up the floor plans. Ultimately, we can see the current existing arrangement. This is the proposed arrangement. You'll note that there is not much detail beyond the actual new pedestrian way that would come through to the tramway. The tramway is separate has a separate listed building consent for it. So that has been dealt with separately. There's also a separate marine licence for that work. That work doesn't actually require planning permission, but again, requires marine licence and requires listed building consent. What the works we are looking at is purely the footprint of the existing building. So beyond that is outside the scope of this application. And as we can say, at the moment, the only changes through here really is opening up of this facade, and this little bit here is an infill extension. So that's the only footprint extension of the current building. Otherwise, what is in front of you is what is proposed.
Are you happy, Councillor Drew? Yeah. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. I think we'll all agree that the current arrangement for pedestrians sharing the access to and from the pier along with traffic is totally unsatisfactory, and it's really good. I know the actual tramway itself doesn't come within this application, but obviously there is that linkage through. But reading through, and it may be something that is again outside of our remit, but I can't see how consideration is given or has been given to those with protected characteristics. I think the question, part of my question has been answered by originally there was going to be that step change, which for people with accessibility issues, and not everyone of protected characteristics is actually in a wheelchair, but could have caused issues. But do we have any sort of recommendations that we can make in terms of the toilets to ensure that those with protected characteristics, for example, and accessibility has been considered as part of the overall design? Because I'm sorry, I couldn't see it in here.
Gullenberg.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. There is actually an accessible toilet that is proposed as part of the refurbishment. Okay.
Are you happy there, Councillor Andre?
Yes, thank you.
Councillor Jarman.
So just turning to the issue of public safety, particularly bearing in mind the very large number of incidents that have been reported in this area. The police had raised concern about establishing an additional entrance exit point. Obviously, when they are seeking to apprehend people, the more exit and entry points there are, the more difficult and challenging that becomes. And I wonder whether their concerns have been taken into regard in considering this application?
William Bogue?
Thank you, Councillor Jarman. Yes, we have taken into account the points. There's a number of points they made. One of the points is about the entry and exit points. The report basically details that at the moment we've got entry and exit points here, 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 and here. So there's 4. And you'll look at the proposed plan. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So in terms of entry and exit points, there is a neutral impact in the fact that the same number of entry and exit points remain. And that is because this existing entry and exit point here is being blocked up before the bin store. So in terms of entry and exit points, that would be there would be no increase in that. The station building already has CCTV within the building covering these areas. I understand from the applicant that they are looking at modernising CCTV arrangements. We have put an informative on the decision notice, setting out the police's recommendations, and we've advised the applicant that they take those on board. There was one other point that was raised about, again, potentially the intervisibility between the station building and the public realm. And what our view is on this is that by enhancing the western elevation and the southwestern elevation through more glazing, you're actually increasing visibility through this project in terms of the public realm and the station building itself. And therefore, we feel that there are benefits overall to the scheme that's being proposed in terms of antisocial behaviour and policing.
Thank you.
And a supplement.
Oh, another one, yes, please.
So following on from the public safety issue, the police had also sought for rolled steel shutters at the entry and exit points. Would those be inside or outside of the new glazed entrances?
Thank you, Chairman. Roller shutters is not proposed as part of the application. I think we all might have some concerns about how that might appear on the particular building, particular comments being made about heritage value. It's not, this application does not prevent security features from being added at a later date if the applicant chooses to do that in consultation with the police. However, it is not proposed at this time and therefore does not form part of the application.
Thank you. Councillor Spink.
I'm sorry to labour the point on the conservation area, but just to clarify, if I may please, Ms Wilkinson's comment. I have always understood, and correct me therefore if I'm wrong, that if a change is made to a building in a conservation area, that change has to preserve or enhance the character or appearance of the conservation area, not just of the building. Am I wrong in that?
Thanks, Chairman. As I said it, I will clarify. No, you're not wrong at all, Councillor Spink. That's absolutely accurate. All I was trying to highlight through the use of the photographs is that the question is, does the proposal, based on the current appearance of that building, preserve or enhance the conservation area or not? All I want to do is just highlight the external appearance of that conservation of that building, rather than councillors not necessarily having that in mind when considering the proposal. So sorry if there was confusion there. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have a question, but I'd like to say something. Many years ago, I remember that the Ryde interchange was going to be refurbished then. The council worked with Network Rail, had a really nice design, but for one reason or other, lots of people are complaining about this and complaining about that. We lost it. We lost the money. Government took it back. We're in danger of doing exactly the same. Okay. Now people talk about, oh, this is the gateway to the island. Well, I know lots of islanders who think it's an embarrassment to the island, and we should actually do something about it. Mr. Chandler has told us that this is actually come from government grant that we share with Portsmouth. I think we would be very unwise to create obstructions that may lose us this again. Do we want to be stuck with this for another 10, 12 years, which we have been because of the last scheme that failed? Thank you. That's all I've got to say.
Thank you, Councillor Ward. You brought back memories for me too of the previous schemes. I think about 2005 5 or something like that. Thank you very much.
I was just going to say that, yes, looking at the building as it stands, virtually anything you do to it is likely to make it look better as a building. But it does sit within a conservation area. I don't think what we're doing enhances the conservation area. It removes some of the detraction from the conservation area, but rather than enhancing. So I just think that they've missed the trick. I think that I don't mind the glass canopy, but you could have actually made it look a bit more Victorian. And I would like to move, we accept it, but put a condition on, make the glazed entryway more Victorian.
Right, okay. Thank you, Councillor Churchman. So that's been seconded. Do people would like to maybe elaborate on that idea a bit more?
I just said before, to me, the glass dome is why it's not actually serving a purpose. It seems to be just decoration. It's out of keeping. It sticks out like a sore thumb. And I can't understand why it was ever put there, because it is out of character with a Victorian conservation area. Thank you.
Right. I'm sort of looking for ideas of how we can put this proposal, give it a bit more meat. So, Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. If it's helpful, the recommendation before us recommends conditional permission, and under that is external materials to be used. So perhaps that's a place where we can actually be a little bit more prescriptive in terms of preserving the heritage feel and the conservation area.
Do I have a response to that?
Thank you, Chair, if I may, and thank you, Councillor Quirk, for raising that. I think it would be helpful to officers if we can get some bit of a clearer steer about what might be meant by making it more Victorian, and are we specifically talking about the tower as a standalone element, and or the glazed aspect of the design as well, please?
If you go into, say, Baker Street Station in London, there's lots of Victorian glazing. They tend to be a bit more arched. There are canopies outside quite a few of the old Victorian London stations. I think you can give it a bit more of a feel, even if you just make it more chunky in terms of you probably use aluminium, but it looks like cast iron. I don't think it has to be sort of that dramatic to give it a bit more of a Victorian feel.
Thank you. Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. Just to add to that, I think it's fair to say that almost directly opposite the site, there are some excellent examples of Victorian architecture, which could be used to actually model in terms of both materials and colours and shades.
So, thank you. Mr. Bolton, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chair. Sorry, without wishing to labour the point either, can I just still get this clarity? I think we've cleared up the glazing element, so thank you for that, Councillor Quirk. Is there an objection in terms of the design in relation to the tower element, or are you satisfied with the changes that you've outlined in terms of the glazing, that would address your concerns?
The tower itself doesn't bother me. I think, having lots of Victorian buildings had glazed entrances, so there's no problem about that. You look at Victorian glass houses are cute. But they have a style about them. They don't look like someone's just bought it from a local double glazing company. And I think that's, we want something that is a gateway. And I think we should be improving both the building and the local environment. We've got an opportunity and it's not going to come again. So if we don't do it now, then we've lost it.
Thank you. Councillor Spink.
Perhaps I could just ask this. I think it's well meant. I think there's sometimes a danger that we might create something of a monster if we just try and leave instructions for an architect to change it. I take on board Councillor Ward's comments that we don't want to lose this opportunity. And I do recognise that various stages have time limits and have to be completed within time. On the other hand, it'd be a great shame if in years to come people look at the Ryde station and say, you know, do you think they could have done better than that when they spent all that money? I mean, I just think that we're setting ourselves up here for what is not a very attractive building when we're trying to improve not only the connectivity of the area, the transport aspect, but also Ryde could do. I mean, it's a beautiful town, potentially, but it does have some eyesores, and this is one of them which we could improve, in my view. If we were to ask the architect to come up with just a scheme to show how the facade could be changed to make it look more Victorian, how much of a delay would that necessarily cause? And would this then, because I don't know exactly what the time limit on this is, and if it were then to come back to planning committee because we've simply adjourned the matter, so come back to planning committee as a priority for us to look at the scheme, would that still mean that we have got time to build it and keep the grant, which is obviously important?
Okay, Mr. Bolton, please.
Thank you, Chair. I can advise that the applicant specifically targeted bringing this application to this planning committee because of the timescales involved. So beyond that, I'm not in a position to confirm what the approach would be or what impact that would be on that particular aspect of the project timetable.
I saw somewhere in the papers that I think it has to be delivered, and I don't know if it's just this section or it has to all be completed by 2023. Is that, do you know if that's right? It doesn't say when in 2020. We might have a little bit more time than thought, and if the architect were to prioritize it, it may well be that it could come back to planning committee in a month's time.
Can I ask Mr. Chandler if you can give any help us out on this one, please?
Thank you, Chair. I can. The Transforming Cities Fund has been grant funded in regards to a deadline of the 1st of April 2023, with the works for all elements completed within that time. There may be flexibility in that time period. However, we've got to bear in mind not just the funding grant conditions, but also the potential impact at a peak season tourist area time. You know, ideally, these elements of the same project would come together in a timely fashion to ensure that minimum impact to the tourist season, and obviously with the facilities being open. Unfortunately, additional time for design may impact on those deadlines, and we would need to go back to the funding body if we are looking at a further delay.
Thank you, that's very clear. We don't really have any time to play with on this one then, do we? It's April next year.
No, relatively tight, unfortunately. This is why we've specifically timed for this application to come to this committee. Thank you.
Councillor Jarman.
So I'm also conscious of the timescale that we've got in front of us and not wishing to introduce any delay that would derail the project. But when I look at the building, my concern is that what I'm looking at is a modern railway station. The windows are square or rectangular, and I think to try and add a little bit of emphasis to what Councillor Quirk was suggesting in terms of a more Victorian feel to it. If one looks at Baker Street or at Paddington or any of the classic railway stations that retain that heritage cultural value, what you'll find is that typically windows and entrances are arched, not rectangular like the shop fronts that we see in a modern high street. And simply making those very rectangular, tall, floor to ceiling glass panels arched would in itself enhance the overall appeal and give it more of a Victorian outlook. So I don't think we need to try and be over prescriptive to the architect in the design. But I think any reasonable qualified architect would be able to look at what are the classic features that make something look Victorian as a heritage site, and to introduce those relatively small minor modifications here, even to the shape of the windows and the pillaring between them. I think that could be done relatively simply. The same with the entrance doors. If I look at them, they look like, automated glazed doors that one would find on the entrance to a sweet shop or something else. They don't look classic Victorian in terms of the architecture that one would expect. And I think this is a very rare opportunity for us to take a heritage building and really make something of it which is truly representative and a gateway to the island.
Are there any other comments people would like to make on this?
Yes, we have a timescale to the 1st of April. However, this building is going to be there for the next 50, 100 years. And quite frankly, I don't think my Ryde residents would appreciate that. We have to be a bit strategic about this. I understand the timescales, but I'm sorry, 3 months, well, 5 months, and yet 50 years.
Councillor Quirk.
It doesn't need to come back to committee. A decision needs to be made, otherwise it's not going to happen. But I would like to have, and I think you've maybe got some wording, and I move that the motion that they've got when they read it out be put.
So yes, I got. I think Mr. Bolter is going to suggest some wording. Is that right?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so having listened to the discussion, officers can suggest that we amend the wording to condition 5. So it then reads, notwithstanding the submitted plan, the external alterations hereby permitted, other than demolition works, shall not begin until details of the fenestration, glazing, materials and finishes, including colour, to be used in the construction of the external surfaces of the development have been submitted to and approved in writing by the LPA. These shall have special regard to the Victorian character of the surrounding conservation area. Development shall be carried out in accordance with the approved details.
Very good, thank you. Sorry, can we move to the vote? Yeah, I'd suggest that. Right, we've got a proposal. You've heard it. We've had it seconded. Can I see who's in favour of that proposal?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Thank you very much indeed. So I think that was a unanimous vote. Thank you very much. So should we move to the next item? Members will note there is a paper on your desk about further advice from Island Roads on this application, reinforcing their earlier conclusion, really. Okay, we move on to the second item, which is land adjacent to 12 Tennyson View, Elm Lane, Calbourne. Mr. Kuhlenberg again, yes, thank you very much.
Thank you, Chairman. So the application relates to a part of an agricultural field on the western side of Elm Lane. The application site boundary is highlighted red on this aerial photography. Calbourne Cross is located to the south and there's existing residential development, Tennyson View and other properties that extends southwards towards the Sun Inn and Calvin Cross, as well as some existing public transport onward connections in terms of the bus service. So this is the application site plan. Again, it just shows the application site area. Members will note the existing access, which they would have seen on the site visit, which leads through to the field. That is outside the application site boundary. There is new access that's proposed to be formed through the application site boundary to Elm Lane. Public footpath CB12, again, there's a style members would have seen on the site visit approximately here, and then there's another style here. So although the legal line crosses diagonally, and that's worth bearing in mind, at the moment, it's fairly up to people to cross the stile and then cross over that stile and then head diagonally southwards towards the main road. I just put some site photos up so members can be reminded of the general site. So this is the north boundary here. This is looking towards 12 Tennyson View and the boundary hedgerow to the south. This is taking a view towards the open countryside and the north boundary of the site through here. Sorry, the west side boundary here. And this is looking at the east side boundary of Elm Lane. Again, a more zoomed in photo looking at the side of 12 Tennyson View. In terms of outside the site, this is looking back towards Calvin Cross and 12 Tennyson View is here. This is the application boundary site hedgerow through here. This is a photo looking from the existing access towards 12 Tennyson View. We have an image taken from the top of the hill where 12 Tennyson View is, looking across the boundary site hedgerow, again looking towards Newbridge. And we have a view here. This is taken from Quarry Lane. So if I just draw members, Quarry Lane runs through here, the top of Elm Lane is up here, Calvin Cross is through here. So you can see that I'm stood about here and I'm looking in a south easterly direction towards the application site. And members will note on this photo, you can see 12 Tennyson View about here and extending through in a ribbon form of development back towards Calvin Cross. Just a point of worth, this is taken in the winter, so obviously this is where the trees and the foliage are generally a lot less, and the properties at Tennyson View in the summer are a little more covered and screened. The application site, the application proposes a development of 12 houses, 11 of which would be affordable. The blue houses are 2-bed. The purple one here is the proposed 4-bed house, which would be a market dwelling, and the remainder of the houses are 3-bed affordable dwellings. The proposed site access would be formed through the hedgerow, and there would need to be a remodelling of the roadside frontage across the entire site. And members will note that it's proposed to put a 2-metre wide footway here. That's dual purpose. One, it's to improve pedestrian connectivity back towards Calvin Cross. It also provides a refuge area for putting bins out for the residents to enable a roadside refuge vehicle collection. Again, the public footpath is indicated through this green line through here. Members will note that it's indicated through here to potentially provide a footway link to CB12 through the application site, which will allow members to come through, existing residents to potentially come through the site as well and join CB12 rather than walking a light carriageway. Again, the proposal seeks consent for the access road and parking areas, and each property would have rear gardens. Just looking at the general scale of development, properties are 2-storey, and there's a bit of variety in terms of hipped and gable form. The materials aren't detailed in the application form. There is a condition that's recommended to agree those. And taking a look through here, this is a site section. It's taken through plot 6, which is this plot here. The section is actually drawn through here, and that generally shows the Elm Lane, the roadside bank, and generally how existing levels would need to be lowered slightly to provide a more flatter profile for the proposed development. Taking a look at the elevations, again, this is just having a quick look through the proposed elevations for each plot, and you'll see that I've indicated over here which elevations those relate to. And then turning to the proposed access arrangements, I think it's worth clarifying at this point in terms of visibility. I think there's a bit of an error in some of the published reports, so I'd like to be very clear to members in terms of the visibility requirements and the recommendation. Looking downhill in a northerly direction, Currently utilising the whole frontage, 83 metres of visibility could be achieved. Island Roads recommend that the visibility should be 95 metres in that direction. And so there is a -12 deficiency in terms of the Island Roads recommendation, officer's recommendation, and the available visibility in the downhill direction. And obviously this is the photo taken showing in that downhill direction. As we look uphill back towards the existing properties in Calbourne, there is a 55-metre achievable visibility splay. The recommendation from Island Roads is that 97 metres is required. That is a -42-metre deficiency in visibility. The neighbouring access, 12 Thames View, would enable 62 metres visibility, but that would still be deficient and ultimately could not be relied on and potentially could be obstructed should someone decide to alter the boundary treatment between the application site and 12 Tennyson View. The update paper refers to Manual for Streets 2. That is a material consideration. It is a different set of standards, and it is our view and Island Road's view that that is appropriate for where speeds are more reflective of a residential environment and generally where those speeds are less than 37 miles per hour. For members' information, the Manual for Streets standards would require 56 metres in a westbound direction, in a northbound direction. And at the moment, there is 83 metres achievable. So if you were to apply the Manual for Streets 2 standards, then you would have achievable visibility in this direction. However, on the uphill direction, Manual for Streets 2 would require 70 metres and only 55 metres achievable, 62 metres even if you take into account the neighbouring access. So ultimately, if you were to take into account the neighbouring access, it would be deficient by 8 metres in terms of the uphill visibility. If you didn't take into account the neighbouring access, it would be -15 metres. So I guess the point officers would make is that whether you apply the Design Manual for Roads and Bridges standards or you apply the Manual for Street 2 standards, the access is still substandard in terms of visibility. Members will note that the 85th percentile speeds as well for vehicles travelling in a southbound direction past the application site is 38.2 miles per hour, and from a northbound direction is 39 miles per hour. Therefore, in officers' view, these speeds, the 85th percentile speeds, are above 37 miles per hour and are more akin to a 40 mile per hour environment. Just having a quick look at the proposed changes to the site boundary, and this is for the road in terms of providing the pavement. You'll notice that there's A, B, and C sections that are cut through the site at these points. Members will note that the hatched area is the bank that would need to be removed and set back to create the pavement. And there would be some reprofiling of a low bank, about ½ a metre to less than a metre. And then hedgerow would be replaced behind that pavement and at the top of the bank. And again, ultimately at this end, it would be about 300 to 400 high, that bank. As you come down towards site access, it's more akin to a metre that it would need to be. And that is generally the proposals. Thank you.
Mr. Queenenberg. Can I ask Mr. Salmon, please, to speak as the agent? Thank you. You're 3 minutes, Mr. Salmon.
If I could kick off, please, Chair. Thank you. Just to, Mr. Salmon will talk about the specific planning issues. I'd like to provide some sort of history and context to this, please. We were approached by the landowner here in 2018 because he was concerned that over time that the village had suffered in terms of its dynamism and amenities because young people were not able to remain there because of the lack of affordable homes. At the time, the site was identified as a site suitable for housing in the Schlar. And the first thing that we did, which is something that Vectis always do, is to go and talk to the parish council, which we did in November 2018. And they recognised the concerns and actually gave us support in principle at that point. We also spoke to the parish councillor, who also supported it and did so until recently, when he's no longer the parish council. We also then submitted to a pre-app, and the response that we had back from that in June 2020 was positive. So at the point that we submitted for planning, all the indications were that there was support for this.
We did offer to go back to the parish council with further detail, because obviously their principal agreement was without the detail. They declined on the basis of wanting to respond rather than influence. We would also have undertaken a much more detailed public consultation, but you will remember during this time we were all stuck indoors through lockdowns and furloughs and all the rest of it. We submitted planning in October 2020. Obviously, we understood what the objections were. Mr. Salmon will go through those in detail, but I think we believe that we could address those, not least of which issues around materials and design. Those of you that know the scheme that we've been doing at Branston Farm will know that actually Vectis puts a great deal of stress on quality of design and sensitivity to the environment. Clearly, there is a housing crisis on the island. Really don't need to remind you, Vectis have been the only provider of affordable homes over the last couple of years, and to my knowledge, are likely to be the only provider in the future of this type of scheme, which will be at social rents with accompanying support, community development and support for residents, which really can only be provided by non-profit organisations. We will be keen to go back and work with the parish if it was felt that this was an acceptable site. Once again, to deal with objections and also to revisit with public consultation. We would look for this site to be with a local lettings policy, so it would be addressing the issues that were raised with us initially, which was that it will be for the village. And I would suggest that as a local lettings scheme, that the majority of people who live there will currently be residing there. So impact on further traffic flows would be rather less, I think, than is assumed. And indeed, they may result in fewer traffic flows in the future because people who would have gone away and had to return to that village will no longer have to do so. So I'll hand over to Phil.
Thank you, Mr. Pearl. So Mr. Salmon, please. Again, 3 minutes, please.
Thank you, Chairman. In order to determine any planning application, an authority must take a view on all relevant planning considerations and make a balanced judgment. This nevertheless requires the application of appropriate weight to those considerations to identify overriding benefits that any scheme presents. This application seeks to provide 11 affordable housing units out of the 12 which are much needed on the Isle of Wight. I would like to stress that housing delivery on the island over the past 3 years, as outlined in the government's housing delivery figures at 58% of need, is poor, to put it mildly. The rate of delivery of affordable housing is far worse. It is a government requirement where there is no 5-year land supply and where delivery is poor for there to be a greater presumption to approve sustainable schemes. This is certainly the approach taken on the decision to grant permission for 42 affordable houses on the council-owned site at Branston Farm. This Elm Lane site has previously been considered by the local authority at a strategic level and supported in the 2018 SHLA. The site is both deliverable and developable based on officer assessment. The design and layout is contextual, of an appropriate rural design-based density and accessible. Whilst it is accepted that the site access proposed is located just outside of the 30-mile-an-hour zone, the limit actually ends on the southern boundary, just 43 metres from the proposed access. Submitted traffic count data clearly shows that the average speeds of traffic passing the proposed access are closer to 30 miles an hour than the national speed limit. Our highways consultant states that highways guidance on manual for streets should be applied in this instance and not design manual for roads and bridges that has been used. DMRB applies to trunk roads and Elm Lane is clearly not a trunk road. The proposed site access is achievable and safe. Traffic generation from the site falls well below the 5% assessment threshold for Elm Lane. The revised layout now includes a footway that would take residents to the southern end of the site. Housing need and deliverability are the key determining issues of this application. Irrespective of whether members accept the government housing need figures, it is a fact that the 2019 Shelfleet Affordable Housing Scheme, built by Sovereign Housing, was oversubscribed to the tune of 180 disappointed households who needed affordable housing but could not be accommodated within the area. If the local authority is to get anywhere near providing the much needed housing, and if its intentions to provide for a 5-year land supply of housing are genuine, sites such as this need to be brought forward and a balanced judgment made that tip the balance in favour of granting planning permission? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Simon. Councillor Lumley, you want to kick off? I beg your pardon, Councillor Brodie.
Should know by now, Chair. I've got a number of questions of officers regarding this because it's the recommendation for refusal entirely puzzles me and bemuses me. We're a local authority that has to have a presumption in favour of sustainable development, and I believe this is potentially a very sustainable development, and I don't believe officers have argued that correctly. Questions I'd like to flag up with that don't seem to be addressed in this report whatsoever. There's this, I mean, can I just say I didn't attend the site visit on Friday, but I spent an hour on Saturday morning at the site as I normally do. I cycled to there as I normally do, and as a cyclist and a bus user, a lot of what I'm about to say is valid in terms of what my lifestyle. Firstly, it is said at paragraph 3.1, Stuart, that this site is 250 metres from the junction. At paragraph 7.23, it's 350 metres. It's suddenly increased by 100 metres to the bus stop, which is right by the junction if you're going into Newport. Having cycled from the junction with Quarry Lane and Five Houses Lane, which I found to be half a mile, I would guess it's probably round about 350 metres, but you need to clarify that for me. There is no mention whatsoever of the plans for a greenway, which will be literally only 0.5 miles to the north of this site. As a greenway which will give access to easy access by cycle to Newport or to villages in the West Wide that do have shops and stores, etc., etc. So I would suggest that there's been a major omission in that report, that there's no suggestion of the cycleway. There's a lot of discussion regarding, Stuart, regarding lighting on the 250 or is it 350 metres. There's no suggestion of any discussion with the applicants regarding the potential for installing perhaps solar lighting on that part of Elm Lane to make it safer for people. Have there been any discussions with the applicant regarding the issues that you refer to on highway safety? There's a well-known fact that where there are parked cars, that slows traffic down. I have never, on the practically fortnightly times that I cycle along Elm Lane, ever come across traffic at the speeds that have been suggested as being in the percentile there. The traffic is slowed down, certainly heading northbound, if not southbound, by the traffic that is parked outside the houses on Tennyson View. The bus service, there's a suggestion in your report that the bus service is poor. Well, frankly, Stuart, the number 7 bus, which travels along there every hour, which you could use to get to work on a morning, 6 days a week. You couldn't do it on a Sunday, admittedly, but also you could get home from Newport to 5 to 11, 7 days a week. Is one of them, is possibly, and Stuart Chandler might be able to confirm this for me, the most profitable bus service that Southern Vectors have on the Isle of Wight, the number 7, which half-hourly goes via Shalfleet and the other half-hour goes via Calbourne. I'm sure that residents of Bryston, for instance, over the hill, would love a bus service that was as regular as the number 7 when it goes through Calbourne. Can you explain to me why the bus service hasn't been detailed on a more factual basis than you have it there? There is no discussion regarding, the right of way which crosses across the top of the top site. I mean, it's a very simple process as far as I'm concerned to have a diversion order. I mean, rights of way team do this all the time in terms of planning applications. I just get this feeling, Stuart, that planning officers don't want this application to go through. And given the absolute lack of delivering affordable housing on the Isle of Wight, which is so much needed, it concerns me massively. Finally, just to wrap up on my concerns, and there's a lot of questions in there, Stuart, and I accept that. I'm concerned that if you had been recommending acceptance, that you're happy to accept 64% affordable rented, when the island plan calls for 70%. I would personally always prefer to say 100%, but other councillors wouldn't agree with me. I think we should at least be looking for 70%, which would be 8 houses rather than the 7 that are suggested. And very, very finally, I haven't mentioned anything about the nitrate neutrality. I recognise that's a key issue. I'm no expert on the area. I can talk about buses and cycling till the cows come home, but I know nothing about nitrate neutrality. But surely there must be a way of getting around that with Vectors Housing Association. It has to be said, you know, and I have no connection with them. I mean, I know Martin Pearl of old, but I have no connection. You know, to be applauded for their efforts in attempting to deliver affordable housing on the island, unlike the other registered providers on the island, the two main ones who I won't name today. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Brody. That was a lot of different subjects in there, and I think we need to come back to some of them in a lot more detail. Mr. Quillenberg, would you like to respond to some of the points? Because there was a lot, but there are some of them quite specific, factual ones.
Thank you, Chairman. Hopefully I've got most of them, so I'll go through them and I'm sure Councillor Brody will remind me if I've missed any. So firstly, to corroborate this at a distance, I've just taken another measurement off Google and it is 250 metres from the junction, not 300, so apologies if there's an error in the report. In terms of the Greenway, although it's not specifically mentioned in the report, officers have considered the fact that this would form part of the Greenway. However, we're also dealing with the current situation. We're assessing the application as it currently stands. And our view simply is that whilst the Greenway would come past Elm Lane, this ultimately, the location of Calbourne is such that while some users may use the Greenway, given its more remote location, it is quite a cycle journey to go into Freshwater and to Newport, and therefore for most trips, they're likely to be made by car and not by cycle. So I appreciate what Councillor Brody's saying, and I know myself as a cyclist, I've cycled past Elm Lane plenty of times and out to the West White, but generally our view is that actually because of the location, that is likely to encourage car trips rather than deter them. In terms of the question on lighting, in terms of, I mean, again, landscaping is reserved by planning condition. We could potentially adapt, those conditions to include lighting within the application site. The applicant doesn't have control beyond the site boundaries, so therefore any lighting that we could potentially put in would have to be along the within the site itself. And ultimately, obviously, with any lighting, we're talking about rural location. And again, members will need to consider whether that's desirable for this location in terms of character. So again, that's just a point for members to consider. In terms of highway safety and percentile speeds, again, you'll all take your own views on that with your knowledge of the island, but this is based on speed data provided by the applicant and the survey data that they undertook outside the application site access. So that data is not made up. That is data that the applicant has provided as part of their transport assessment, and therefore Island Road's assessment and our assessment is based on the data provided by the applicant. I think lastly, we've got nitrates, I think, as was asked for. That is, and officers appreciate that it's a potential overcomable issue. Our view is that at the moment, having assessed the application, that the application is not acceptable, and we have balanced the issues, and the report goes through how we balance those issues, whether you agree or not, don't agree with that. And our view is that because of the access arrangements, because of the remote location, because of the lack of street lighting, that would result in an unsafe environment for future residents, and therefore that is why we have put forward a recommendation for refusal alongside other reasons on character and design. Nitrates is a reason for refusal at the moment because legally the committee cannot permit the application unless the application has been demonstrated as nitrate neutral and any mitigation is secured through the planning process or by legal agreement. We're not there yet in terms of the nitrates issue, and my advice would be that if members were to decide to recommend or to consider this application should be approved, that we would need to look at a deferment to allow us to explore that issue further with the applicant so they can address the nitrates issue and allow us to come back with a scheme that would be legally compliant. There was a point made about rights of way. I think we've touched on how the applicant is proposing to potentially improve links to that right of way through the application site. Our view is that the right of way is currently through agricultural fields. It's quite some distance over to the main road where there are some more bus stops, but ultimately people are more likely to walk through the unlit carriageway to Calbourne Cross. It's our view that that's not a safe environment. It's more likely people are going to take the car. And ultimately, With the access being substandard, the issues with Kelbourne being substandard in terms of visibility at Kelbourne Cross, and the fact that we're talking about an unlit and no pavement environment, we just feel that the application site, the access is unsafe, and a pedestrian connectivity would mean that potentially you'd have people walking through an unlit live carriageway, where the speeds are more 40 mile per hour than they are 30.
Very quickly. Well done, Stuart. You got them all. You didn't. Bar one, which is probably the key issue with the bus services. You didn't address that. You can come back to that in a minute. I would just point out in terms of. I mean, I disagree with a lot of what you've said. It's quite evident from my questions, and I will probably try and propose acceptance of this application later on, or I will vote against the refusal thing. I mean, that no about that. However, in terms of the Greenway, I would just remind officers that the Greenway was very much a feature of the Lee Farm application that we decided not long ago with Thorley and Wellow. And now planning officers are telling it it's not relevant, which I find a little bit confusing, to be frank. It's either relevant or it's not, given that we approved Lee Farm on the basis that we were going to get some land from the owners of Lee Farm to help it to complete the Greenway at some point in the future. But I'll leave it there for now, Chair, and consider what I might propose. Thank you.
Mr. Bolton.
Thank you, Chair. If I may, just to pick up on some of the points from public speaking and some of the points that Councillor Brodie has made, and I'll only look at them in terms of a general observation to hopefully aid members in their deliberations when it comes to thinking about recommendation. And I would just make the point that yes, in terms of what has been described as our land supply and housing delivery issues or situation, there are some issues with that. But I think it is key to just highlight to councillors that the consideration when we talk about this is we should be granting planning permission. That is our starting point, unless, and when we actually look at point D2 of paragraph 11 of the NPPF, any adverse impacts of doing so would significantly and demonstrably outweigh the benefits when assessed against the policies in this framework taken as a whole. Now, I think as Stuart has articulated, and as you would have seen through the report, it is the view of officers that when balancing the range of issues, and there is no getting away, they are difficult issues to balance. And I'll be perfectly honest, that's why the application is in front of you this evening, councillors, because officers very much recognise that. And in the absence of a councillor-led call-in, I have directed the application to enable these issues to be debated and considered. So it is very much an understanding, certainly from our perspective, that the weighing up when considering this application has very much been an on balance and use of planning judgment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Bolton. That was useful. Councillor Quirk.
This is the development of 3 and 4 bedroom houses, sorry, 2 and 3 bedroom houses, which you might reasonably expect to be occupied by families with children. How far is it in walking terms to the nearest primary school, and do they have vacancies?
If I may, Chair, officers are desperately looking at Google Earth. What I could say at the moment is it would certainly be a scenic walk, whether it's to Bryston Primary School or Shalfleet. I think the distances would be significant, and certainly some of the terrain involved in walking to Bryston might prove to be challenging.
Thank you. Councillor Quirk.
So if I can just sort of follow up on that. The site needs to be accessible, and I have what vectors do is wonderful stuff, and in principle, I would love to be able to support this. But you've got to think about the practicalities. if you're going to put families in there, if they're coming off of our housing list, the people who get to the top of our housing list can't afford cars. How are they going to get their kids to school? And they might be far enough that they can be entitled to a bus trip, but I don't know. I'm just a bit concerned about the people you're putting there and actually how viable the site is for families. I would like to be able to support it, but I've got real concerns.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Jarman, you're next on my list.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I also have a few questions to put to Stuart, if I may. I'll wait for him to pick up his pen because I suspect he might want to write a few of them down. The first one is, when you said utilising the hedges, I assume what you mean is actually that the hedges are lost, both north and south, in the attempt to get that splay. That was the first part. The second part is the site where we looked at where the entrance would be. Forgive me if I'm wrong, but the land beyond the hedge would be higher, noticeably higher than the road itself, I believe. And so you would have a slope down from the housing development onto the road itself. And I wondered whether that affected the calculation in any way, either in terms of the splay or in terms of the calculations that have been done for road traffic visibility. The third one I had is the site proposal includes a footpath from the splay to the beginning of the existing houses. I don't recall from the site visit, but I believe I'm right, that there was no footpath from that point to the cross. So you would have a very short length of footpath and then go back to no footpath, and indeed have no footpath at all on the southern part of the site or beyond. And then the final question I have is, although this part of the lane has no street lighting at the moment, and I appreciate what Councillor Brodie said about the possibility of putting in street lighting, which is a good idea. Is there street lighting on the top part of the road from this site to the cross? I don't believe there is. And there certainly is not below the site.
Are you finished, Councillor Jarman?
I have.
Mr. Killingberg.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll take the street lighting as that was the last one raised. There is currently no street lighting from the site to Calbourne Cross. So that entire length, there is no street lighting. In terms of the footpath, you're correct. The footpath only goes from the right-hand side of the site access to the site boundary with 12 Tennyson View. So there is no footpath all the way to the cross. So again, there's no street lighting and there's no footpath from the site all the way to Calbourne Cross. In terms of hedges lost, yes, you're quite correct. The hedgerow would have to be lost across the entire eastern frontage with Elm Lane. That would be mitigated, or is supposed to be mitigated, by a new hedgerow that we planted behind the visibility displays at the back of the remodelled embankment. Yeah, that's the answer to that one. And then you're quite correct. I believe if I go back to site sections, you will see that at this point here, if I can section in, so this section here is taken through on the left hand side of plot 6, between plot 6 and plot 7. So that is predominantly coming through roughly where the site access is. So you can see there that generally the existing bank there at that point is going to, or that bank's going to probably be about 1 metre to 1.5 metres ultimately. However, there would need to be a remodelling of that bank, so it would have to provide that visibility. So the chances are that bank is going to be lowered to about 1 metre or less.
So just by way of a clarification there, so the traffic coming off of this site, if it were to proceed, would be coming down a slope onto the lane. The traffic coming from their right, coming down from the cross, will be coming down I think it was 8% gradient, I think the road is roughly, coming down that side. And as we saw in the picture, it is very narrow and there are lots of leaves on it. So the fact is you've got two cars coming out of the side and coming down the slope, both of which would be travelling effectively downhill. Is that right?
Correct.
Correct. Okay. The other thing, I just wanted to be very precise about what you said at one point, that you said the committee cannot legally approve this due to the unknown nitrate issue. Is that, did I write that down correctly?
Yes, you're correct. Yeah, at this moment in time, because we haven't got the information to demonstrate the development is nitrate neutral, we can't complete our appropriate assessment under habitat regs, and therefore the habitat regs do not allow us to permit this development at this moment in time.
I'd just like to ask Mr. Gard to speak on this point. It's crucial, I think.
Sorry, before you finish, Chair, it seems odd that it comes before the committee where, forgive me, my fellow councillors for raising this. It seems odd to come before the committee where we do not have the option to approve some. We only have the option to, well, effectively reject it or defer it. That's my end where we've got to? Sorry, I'll go defer to Ben Guy.
No, Councillor John may not require my assistance on this point. I was simply going to say that that strictly speaking, it remains open to the committee to approve the application. The advice in the strongest possible terms, given the situation of the lack of the screening assessment, the screening assessment and habitats assessment, and the understanding of the nitrates points, in the strongest possible terms on those points alone, the advice would be not to approve. But if you were minded to look favourably on the application, to defer it back to a future committee. So I take the point that my colleagues in planning make when they say that you can't because of those reasons. In theory, that option remains open to you. But we would be saying the advice in the strongest possible terms, if you were to look at it favourably, would be to revert the application back to committee, having deferred it for clarification on the nitrates and having considered or having had the benefit in your consideration of the habitats regulations point as well.
But that wouldn't change any of the other material elements we've heard today, or the road or the layout or anything else. Everything else would be as is.
Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. And effectively, following on from Mr. Guard's advice, that is why we considered it an appropriate exercise to bring the application in front of committee. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Churchman, you've been waiting a while, haven't you?
I'm still unclear as to why we have an application in front of us, which you are saying is illegal virtually. Can we not, because I'm sorry, to my simple mind, that is what I'm being told. Can we not, whether we, if, for example, we decided as a committee, just make it a condition, as we have in things in the past, that certain elements have to be dealt with before the permission can be enacted?
Mr. Bolter.
Thank you, Chair. With most issues, Councillor Churchman, yes, that would be the way that we can normally go about it. However, in this sole issue relating to nitrates, that is a point of law, and as such, that is something that needs to be resolved and addressed in advance of a decision. So that is not an issue that we would be recommending that a condition is sought to address. That information should be available to us up front to enable the decision to be made.
May I come back? Supplementary.
Councillor Churchman.
In which case, surely it would be simpler to defer this to another committee and ask the people, developer concerned, to come up with the relevant information that is required to progress the application properly. Thank you, Chair.
Mr. Bolter.
Thank you. Absolutely, that is very much a route that is available to the committee should they wish to take it. I think if the committee were so minded to go down that route, it would be certainly very helpful to officers, and I dare say also to the applicant and their agent, as to get an understanding from committee this evening as to whether that is the sole issue in terms of nitrates, is the sole issue that the committee have concerns about, because potentially undertaking that work, there will be a cost and a time implication involved in that. And I dare say that the applicant would not really want to be doing that work unnecessarily, if then the application would then be refused on other grounds if it were to come back.
Councillor Ward, you're next on my list.
Thank you, Chairman. On the site visit, when we walked the road, it seemed obvious that we could reduce the speed limit. okay, down to 30 miles an hour. But I know Island Road's point about you shouldn't use speed limits to overcome a particular problem. But we aren't using it to overcome a particular problem, because if we remove the hedgerow, which we intend to do, your visibility is restored. So it all depends where that hedgerow goes back. If we put it back far enough where there is no obstruction, then you can enact the Island Road's bit of reducing the speed limit.
Councillor Christensen's my next name. No, okay, you're out. Councillor Churchman, you're my next one.
Sorry, third bite of the cherry. All I would say to people is housing is a compromise. You buy a house because you can afford it. It's somewhere where you hope that you can live. If you've got children who go to school, all these things have to be taken into account when you purchase a property. I understand the worries about getting children to school, but I'm sorry, that is the problem of any house owner, and they have to get on with it. To me, the development is less obtrusive, I think, than anything that I've ever seen come before planning committee before. It's on the end of the village. Across the downs, when we all stood there, we all recognised that there is a view, but the houses would be insignificant from what would be 3, 4, 5 miles away. And personally, I think for somebody, I didn't think philanthropic people were still around. And for somebody to come and offer us a site for affordable housing, really, folks, why are we even thinking about it? Provided we get all the bits and pieces ironed out, then for goodness sake, people need houses. People are more important than, when I say a lot of bureaucracy, I understand the bureaucracy, but there has to come a point where, is it people and housing we're talking about, or is it regulations? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Churchman. Councillor Jarman, you're my next one.
So, listening to Mr. Bolter's very strong guidance, I have to say, we all know where we are with housing. We all know what we need, and it would be wonderful if we were to send this back as that being the sole issue, to echo back the remark that was made. Unfortunately, as we know, that is not the sole issue. Even taking out the hedgerows, we don't have sufficient splay. We don't resolve the lighting issue. We don't resolve the pavement issue. We don't resolve the transport to school issue. All the other issues remain. So, I feel it would be disingenuous of us to return something to cause significant more work both to the officers and to the applicant, under the illusion that those issues can be resolved when we've received such strong indication that they cannot be resolved. That would seem to be, us creating a situation of hope, which we don't have a means to resolve at the present time. So I was inclined, I have to say, to defer this, to seek for clarification on that would overcome this legal disbarment that we were presented with. But I fear that if we were to do that, the list of issues we would be deferring it with would include a number of issues which we've been assured are not resolvable. And therefore, the only option we seem to be presented with is to reject the current application. Of course, it would always be open to a further application in the future were those to be overcome, with a complete application that included the nitrate disposal and other issues with the road. So, it's with deep regret that I'm putting forward a motion that we accept the officer proposal here and we reject this application for that very long list of issues, including the nitrates issues, but including the issues which seem to be insurpassable in terms of highways, in terms of the pedestrian access and safety on the road, including the lighting up to the cross, and in terms of safe pedestrian access to the site. And I'll look for a seconder for that motion.
Councillor Jarman, before you do that, I've got 4 more names down, and I'd like to they'll allow those 4 people to speak before we go to the seconder and the motion, because I have 4 people wanting to speak, if you want to follow me. And if we go down to the motion, they'll lose the opportunity perhaps to do so. So if I could ask the 4 people, I said 3 people, because you've just spoken. If I could ask Councillor Drew and Brodie and Andre to make your points, please, then we'll return to Councillor Jarman's motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a general question actually in relation to the DFT Circular 1 2013. I note that it's regarded as guidance and that generally the position wouldn't be, as Councillor Jarman has mentioned, to impose traffic speed limits for a particular issue. I mean, there's guidance and there's guidance. How strongly weighted is that? Is there anything in terms of the choice of words of that circular which can give us an indication? I mean, it may not be germane anyway, given everything that's been said, but I think that it is something that I'd like a little bit more clarity on, if possible. Thank you.
I defer to on roads, if that's okay, Chairman.
Mr. Troughton, can you help us?
It is a government department for transport circular, therefore it has significant weight in terms of ensuring the DC has been taken into account when determining whether a traffic order should be made and whether a speed limit should be reduced or not. And a lot of it is very much based on highway safety issues. So as to say, in reality, excuse me, changing a speed limit for reasons which not take into account character, nature, behaviour, the speed limits don't get observed. There's a big enforcement issue when you do so, because drivers simply don't accept it as being a 30-mile-an-hour environment, therefore they don't actually comply with the speed limit. And a lot of the guidance is very specifically about it's enforceable rather than anything else.
Mr. Troughton, I've got do you mind, Councillor Oliver, if we go back? Are you happy that we continue with with Councillor Jarman's motion? Is that all right? Well, I'll just take the other 2 people. That's Councillor Brodie, Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a few thoughts. I mean, I was going to propose a deferment, but I recognise that Councillor Jarman's got a proposal in for Act 7, which I will vote against. I think he paints a picture of unacceptability that I think is excessive in the extreme. I think many of the issues, other than the nitrate neutrality issue, can be dealt with by condition. I did not propose fixing lighting to any lighting network. There is still a perfect facility for solar lighting that isn't on a network, that is entirely powered by solar power. I'm sure that could be used to address it. And I think we need to get away from that, having to connect to the infrastructure. I think the diversion order on the right of way, I don't see that as as something that can't be addressed. The highways issues, to be frank, you know, we seem to bear so much regard to the fact that the majority of motorists on this island don't abide by speed limits. I think it's farcical. So people can't have homes because of petrol heads, you know, and that's what you're saying when you listen to Island Roads, to be frank. If people drove on Elm Lane at the speed that they should do, there wouldn't be an issue here. The only issue here is the nitrate neutrality. And I recognise that. I do think, and I hadn't thought of this, because I haven't got school-age children anymore, I do think there is an issue about schools as well. And maybe that's something that Councillor Andre, with her other hat on, could look at in terms of if we do get philanthropists, like the gentleman or lady in this case, coming forward, that we could address that so that we could encourage building in rural exception sites. And I would just say to you, Vanessa, given you admire philanthropists, you might want to borrow my copy of The Ragged Trouser Philanthropist, and it might change your politics. But I also just stress, Vanessa, as well, that this is not about owners of the house, because of course 11 of them will be affordable. 7, I would say 8, would be for rent and would be allocated off the housing register. And the other 3 would, 2 is it, would be shared ownership, again allocated through that process. So yes, I believe, colleagues, members, chair, that you should vote against Councillor Jarman's, if it comes up, if it gets second and comes before you, to refuse this application, then allow me to propose deferral subject to a number of conditions, but with a view to acceptance of this application if the issues are lighting, the diversion order, and perhaps the percentage of affordable housing were addressed. And please don't let the petrolheads block homes for your islanders who are desperately in need of affordable rented housing. Let's get this clear. There is a misconception on this island that affordable housing means something that you get a mortgage on. It's not. It's about affordable to rent. Currently at 80% of market rent, it should be lower than that. I think the Draft Island plan had it as lower than that, although not in there. But I think, I think we need to get that message across. Affordable housing, when we discuss it, is not about somebody being able to buy a £250,000 house for 200,000, because that's not affordable.
So Brodie, you're moving into the debates on the motion. I'd prefer to hear just the last point from Councillor Andre, please.
Thank you, Chair. It's been told to us, quite rightly, by Mr. Bolter, Head of Planning, that the reason that this application has come to us is because it's very much in the balance. And it is about balance and how much weight you give to the elements. I came in here with a very open mind, having done the site visit. I've listened to the debate, and that's one of the advantages of coming in at the end. In terms of the lighting, the houses, I know they're outside of this application, but from the site to Calbourne Cross, we've already been told there is no lighting. So the current residents of those houses don't have current lighting. So I don't see that that is actually something that we should actually put against this application. So as I say, having considered, I am minded, I would be willing to defer as per Councillor Brodie. Obviously, I'll wait until the motion comes forward, but I am minded to approve. I do accept that the nitrates is an issue, but I think it has to be said that the applicant and the agent, from reading this, they seem to have gone above and beyond to do everything they possibly can to give us the opportunity to provide a genuinely affordable housing for our residents. And I think it behoves us as members to do everything we possibly can to support that. And if the nitrates issue is, to my mind, that is the only thing that needs to be mitigated. And the applicants already demonstrated their willingness to work with us, then that's what I would be minded to defer with a view to approval. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We've had I do apologise, Councillor Jarman, for interrupting the flow there, because you put forward a motion to reject the application when we haven't had I didn't give you the opportunity of taking a seconder. I do apologise for that. But is there a seconder for Councillor Jarman's motion? There is not. So in that case, we come back to Councillor Brodie's motion, effectively.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, colleagues. I mean, I would just do what Councillor Andres just said. I would propose, I'm not sure about the wording here, that we agree to approve this application, subject to further discussions regarding nitrate neutrality with the applicants and subject to, no, that's all. I think that's all I want to say. That's all I want to say.
I'll second it.
Yeah.
Yeah, well done.
I need some advice on this because I confirm it earlier.
Thank you, Chairman. Just very, very briefly, I think that the officer's advice, staff's advice at this stage would be that were you minded to defer the application to seek clarity on the matters that have been identified to you by officers this evening? That the inference in doing that is that the committee look favourably upon it, having not carried forward the motion to refuse the application. So whilst I think I'd be open with you, Councillor Brody, in saying that we cannot leave this evening on the basis of the approval subject to, because that approval must come armed with the information, but the inference of having said we will defer it subject to receipt of the satisfactory receipt of the nitrates information, and therefore the implication on the habitats is such that in doing so the committee look favourably on it as it stands at the moment, pending receipt of that information, at which point it's open to the committee again to have a look at it and reach a decision based upon that information, whichever way they may fall. So my advice would be for the motion to be to defer pending satisfactory receipt of that information, at which point the committee can then consider it, having looked at it favourably other than that point up until now, for a further decision.
And Mr. Guard, subject to us not then having to revisit a discussion about everything else, other than that, I will take your advice, and I'm very happy with the wording you suggested. Can I suggest, Chair, that that's read out to everybody again? I'm happy with that. I hope Councillor Andre is happy to second it.
Do we have a sort of form of words?
As seconder, I'm obviously we will listen to the wording, but what's been suggested as seconder, I'm happy.
Just to clarify the motion, Chairman, if I can, I believe that what I said was that the motion is to defer the item pending satisfactory receipt of the information that has been identified as being deficient and missing in the report in relation to the nitrate, specifically in relation to the nitrates and the subsequent impact of the habitat regulation assessment point. Okay.
Chair, as a point of order, can I just ask for clarification on this, that if an item is deferred, when it comes back before the committee, we are only able to debate the item on which it was deferred and not the full case. Is that correct?
I've no idea, so I'm going to ask advice on that one.
Yeah, if I can, Chairman, thank you. Because you're missing information, which we are the officer telling you are key to your consideration, it's open to you to reach a decision on the basis of the subsequent information that you get. So you can reach any decision on that once you've got it that you would like, and it is open to the committee to have regard to the whole of the application again. And it's a matter of weighing those key material considerations as well, Councillor Jarman, at that later point.
Thank you. Councillor Clerk.
I'm still concerned about the schools issue, and I would certainly like that to be included in. If we're going to limit ourselves to only being able to address the nitrates, I think we've got to address schools and transport.
Do you want to speak now, Mr. Guard?
I can come back on that point, Chairman. My apologies, Councillor Clerk, for not having done so sooner. This is outside of the planning remit and is not something for consideration as part of this planning application. But there is a statutory duty on the council to provide home to school transport in certain scenarios under section 508B of the Education Act of 1996. And that includes for children up to the age, until they're aged 8, of a walking distance in excess of 2 miles. And my understanding from colleagues is that this would be more than 2 miles to the nearest school. And so home to school transport would be provided up to children up to 8, were the committee minded to approach a separate consideration. So it isn't a planning consideration. It's 3 miles above that, and there is an element of that it takes into account the additional point of whether children receive working tax credits and free meals, which enhances that to 11 years old rather than 8 on the 2 mile point. So the point I make is that they're outside of the planning remit. If the committee were minded to approve it, it's likely, and we haven't got the measurement exactly, but the indications are that, that this development exceeds the distances that you would expect a person to walk. And as a result of that, the council would be under a duty to provide home to school transport.
Councillor Andre, you wanted to speak still?
Just if it's helpful, Chair, in my role as Cabinet Member for Education, what Ben Gard said is exactly right. Let's just be clear. I mean, we are talking a relatively, even if all the houses were occupied by families, we are talking a relatively small number, but there are statutory duties that apply. We are also, we are preparing, and it's also a statutory requirement that we look at place planning, and we do take into account applications that are granted in the area. So obviously this wouldn't be included in that at the moment, but we do actually take into account predicted numbers when we're looking at the place planning, but we do have those statutory requirements.
Well aware of the statutory requirement. The issue is whether about the distances, and we haven't been presented with whether the distances actually qualify. I think we would like at the next, I would certainly like when this comes back to have that clarified that the.
Thank you, Councillor Quirk. I think I'd like to move to the vote now, if everybody's happy. If nothing else needs to say anything. So, okay, so those in favour then of a deferment under the conditions we heard. Name to vote. What's the name vote? Is it? Okay, so how we.
Debbie Andre, Councillor Brodie, Councillor Churchman, Councillor Drew, Councillor Jarman, Councillor Oliver, Councillor Quirk, and Councillor Ward.
Any votes against? Any abstentions?
Councillor Richardson.
Thank you very much. My original plan, there was going to be a 10-minute break at this point, I believe. Yep. If people would like to have a bit of a refreshment, we'll then come back here at 6:15. Okay. Not going to get finished tonight, are we? How long can we extend the meeting for?
So we can go for another hour, I think it is. So we should, I would hope we should be all right.
Thanks very much for coming back. We are now on to the third item. Councillor Jarman, you want to say something?
I'd just like clarification from Ben Guard, if we may. A very large number of us would have dealt with this or a remarkably similar proposal, not that far in the distant past. And I just thought it would be advisable to seek guidance on the matter coming back before us again, and so many of us having heard this matter before.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Jarman. The application is before you in its entirety of a full report, and my advice to you is to come to your own conclusion based on the merits of this application as a whole, taking into consideration the report that you've read and the presentation that you're going to hear, and all of the matters that you hear today on the floor. So I know I don't consider, for example, that anyone has predetermined the application. It's a fresh one before them. There'll be new information that's before you, and that will be key. And so my advice would be to approach it with an open mind, hear all of the matters that are before you today, and come to your conclusion based on that. I hope that helps.
Yes, indeed. You forgive me for asking the question, but it did seem pertinent.
Yes, thank you for that. By the way, just to clarify, we are now looking at the two applications for Gunville. They've got very long titles, which I'm not going to read out, but I think we all know what we're here for. Who do I? So Miss Wilkinson is going to give the presentation on behalf of the planning staff, so thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. Good evening, members. The application seats is the application site, as shown within the red line on the slide. In front of you is an area of approximately 6.4 hectares on the west side of Forest Hills and Arthur Moody Drive, shown within the red line plan. I've also got some Google Earth images which might help. The one at the point of the cursor shows the site in relation to the developments on Ash Lane to the north and Avington Manor View to the south, apologies, which we looked at one on site. We looked at roof profiles from those two developments. The application site is the area in red sitting between those two areas of previously approved housing. I've included some photographs. Obviously, we were there on Friday, so I'll skip through these relatively quickly. A number of councillors have also been there before. And some images of the residential properties in the vicinity, as well as the newer development within Ash Lane and Avington Manor View on the right-hand side of that slide. The application itself seeks consent. It's a hybrid application for full and outline elements, although they're separated. So you'll note the report separates them in terms of comments as well as proposed conditions within the resolution. The full element is the area shown coloured within that plan and within the smaller red line area, and that proposal seeks consent for 36 even dwellings, 10 of which would be 2-bedroom, 26 of which would be 3 bedrooms. For that element of the site, there would be one access proposed, and that would be off Forest Hills at this point, which is the first area that we stood in on Friday, councillors. The larger area of the site that isn't where the dwellings aren't coloured, that is the outline element, and that seeks consent for a further 133, which would see a total of 149 over the whole of the wider red line area. That application is outline only with access and landscaping to be considered at this stage, with all other matters reserved. Access to that element of the development would not only be from the proposed access into phase 1 from Forest Hills, but would also include a further access at this point from Arthur Moody Drive. And the change to this application compared to the previous scheme that members saw is an additional access onto Ash Lane at the point of the cursor. The application also incorporates a link to the West White cycle track and the footpath along the western boundary of the site, apologies, would incorporate part of that cycle track as well as links to the Avington Manor View development, which also links to that cycle track. Councillors will note that there is an updated in the update paper. that clarifies that the report does say that there isn't a 3-metre footway running east to west. That is inaccurate. My apologies. There is a 3-metre footway running east to west. So I wish to just clarify that point covered within the update paper. I've incorporated some images of the proposed houses as part of the full application and just some varying plot types. There are a number of different unit types proposed, so there is a variety of housing as part of the development with different roof profiles and porch features and fenestration. Moving through those. And then I've also included some cross sections, which I thought might be useful. Obviously, the cross section A and cross section B. This one being cross section A, and this one being cross section B, which shows that relationship with the existing properties within the adjacent existing residential area. The application, as stated previously, incorporates 3 access points, my apologies, into the site itself. They would be linked. There appears to be some kind of confusion as to whether they'll section off the development, but ultimately they would all eventually, if the outline area was to be approved and constructed, would link within those. What this also shows is the footpath link onto Avonton Manor View and that footpath along the western boundary, as well as that 3-metre footway cycleway, apologies, down from east to west within the proposed layout. I've incorporated these images, and I would first like to give them a significant health warning because I have driven the green lines and so they are very squiggly. So my apologies to the quality of the images, but what I wish to include was some clarification in terms of the proposed TROs that are sought by way of conditions in 2 forms. One, I will just very briefly go through where they're proposed to be located and the extent of them as part of the application, but also a clarification in terms of the conditions within the application, which didn't get into the update paper, so my apologies for that. What we have clarified within the report is the number of spaces that will be lost as part of these proposed WLO lines and the fact that they are proposed to be mitigated within the layout of the development. This is another change in relation to the previous application that members considered. The green lines on that show the 2 areas for which WLO lines are proposed. So effectively what you would do at the point of Broadwood Lane was extend the existing WLO lines on that corner junction up to and past the existing church entrance. So the reason why I've shown that in 2 little areas is that you'll see that as there's a, on the street view image, you'll see 2 cars parked. Those 2 spaces would be lost. There is then the white line where the entrance to the site. There's then a very small area where the curb is not dropped. The Island Roads have suggested that WLO lines should be put in that area as well, just to cover that small area off. It's unlikely a car could fit in that space, but possibly a motorbike could. So that is incorporated, which is why, although you can see there are 2 spaces parked and 1 car trying to get into the junction, I've indicated within the report that that would be a potential total of 3 spaces as part of the loss of that area within the potential loss of the spaces within the existing network. We then move to the first access that's being proposed and the turning, obviously as part of this you can see where the spaces would be lost. What you will notice that I've shown WLO lines on both sides of the road. Again, apologies for the quality of the squiggle. But obviously you wouldn't lose spaces from both sides of the road because cars couldn't ever park on both sides of the road. So the calculation is based on WLO lines on both sides, but loss of parking on one side because you can't park on both sides of the road. And then the final access showing the area that's currently, councillors, we stood there on Friday, it's currently a grassed area. So that although it would be proposed to have WLO lines up the access road to ensure that people didn't park up the access road itself, those would be on the proposed new road, so they wouldn't result in the loss of any existing parking. So the existing parking would be either side of that access road and opposite, in order to ensure that you wouldn't have anyone blocking the exit or visibility exits from that junction. The number of spaces is covered within the report as part of that. And one of the points of the changes between the application and the previous submission in order to overcome the reasons for refusal is the incorporation of the additional link to Ash Lane. So there is an alternative route out of the site, but also the incorporation of parking spaces There are a selection here, a selection here, and then a selection over here, which give you the number, the 12 effectively that are currently proposed. What members will note is within the conditions of both reports, we have recommended more than that to be provided. So there is a total of 15, which would mean it would equate to the number of spaces that are predicted to be lost as part of the TRO process. So councillors will note as part of the conditions, there's 11 proposed as part of phase 1, and there's 4 proposed as part of phase 2, or the later phases, I should say, as part of the second part, the outline element, apologies. And that would give you the 15 displaced spaces. One point of clarification is that the proposal for when the WO lines are proposed to be necessary is that obviously in relation to phase 1, we would seek to have the WO lines on this junction immediately. The W lines at this point wouldn't be required until the outline element, if that was to be approved, because that junction won't be put in as part of phase 1. The current conditions are worded so that the Broadwood Lane WO lines wouldn't go in as part of the full, but would go in as part of the outline. I would recommend that change as part of an update to the published report, and say that further to Island Road's comments in relation to construction traffic and to assist with the concerns in regards to construction traffic accessing the site, that the WO lines on Broadwood Lane would come in as part of phase 1 and as part of the full element of the consent. So if I can just draw members' attentions to the conditions, just for clarity, what I'm suggesting is that the wording in condition 15 of the outline element, which says, and within Broadwood Lane at the junction with Gunville Road, to extend the existing parking restrictions on the southern side of the road to increase capacity have been secured, should be incorporated into condition 14 of the full application, the proposed condition 14 of the full application. One further minor alteration would be to condition 19, which refers to condition 13, where it should refer to condition 14. So my apologies, councillors, for that error. And I believe that by incorporating the proposed W lines onto Broadwood Lane earlier in the process would assist with the movement of construction traffic for phase 1, as well as being required for phase 2. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Ms Wilkinson. We've got 4 people to speak now on the applications. I'd like to invite Sue Cook to speak first, please. This is for 12 minutes.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. Residents again reject both applications, which are in reality one application for 149 houses, more than doubling the size of the current cul-de-sac. We consider that there is nothing of significance in the new applications to alter the committee's right decision to refuse these applications last year. There appear to be 3 proposed mitigations attempting to reverse the 2021 refusal. The first is the Island Road's recommendation for conditional approval. This is a complete U-turn from the recommendation to refuse last year. The reason for their change in stance would appear to be a rushed-in traffic survey conducted 8th of September 2021, a totally unreliable survey that should never be used to justify such serious decisions. Mayor Brown stated that COVID-related travel restrictions had effectively ended. That is fundamentally flawed and dangerously misleading. Whilst people were allowed to travel, people were working at home with no need to travel. Home working didn't end in the UK until government advised to return to the workplace in January 2022. Additionally, local schools reported whole year closures by the 8th of September 21 due to a spike in COVID cases, and schools didn't return to normal until February 2022. In the current energy crisis, people are rejecting hybrid working and returning to the workplace full time. And so to suggest that travel would never return to pre-COVID levels is both flawed and is again dangerously misleading. Indeed, with the increased Isle of Wight population and the approved building of new houses on 2 developments along Gunville Road already in progress that haven't entered the traffic system yet, you could more defensively argue that traffic flow would increase to higher than pre-COVID levels. The Waverley roundabout cannot be expanded, so knowingly compromising its future functionality and safety is unconscionable. Neither the developer or Island Roads has presented any evidence that traffic levels will not in the long term return to pre-COVID levels, and therefore we believe that the previous grounds for rejecting the proposal remain. The route to the development site is dangerous enough now, and take that from a resident. It has sharp bends and a lot of cars and work vehicles unnecessarily parked along the route. The amount of near misses is alarming. It will get drastically worse with predicted extra traffic. Access onto Gunville Road remains dangerous, with visibility restricted by a garden boundary to the north and a traffic calming island to the south that forces cars to prematurely manoeuvre into the path of oncoming traffic. The active church attracts many visitors throughout the week, and the level of on-street parking in all the roads affected is extremely high, yet no attempt has been made to measure it. More TROs than declared are inevitable. Island Road stated the construction traffic would also compromise the residential amenity of surrounding properties. The development would therefore be contrary to policies SP7 travel and DM2 design quality for new development of the Island Plan core strategy. By their own admission, fundamentally the layout as previously evaluated has not significantly changed. The colossal negative impact on the residential amenity of surrounding properties remains the same. No mitigations are proposed for construction traffic, and the development remains in breaches of policy SP2 and DN2, SP7 and DN2, apologies. No acceptable proposal is made for alternative parking of vehicles on Forest Hills during construction, when parking restrictions will be in place. Many of the residents are tradesmen who rely on easy access to their work vehicles to earn a living and who will be detrimentally affected during construction. In a 2014 report and again in 2021, Island Roads was not prepared to sacrifice the safety of residents or compromise their quality of life. As things have not significantly changed, their decision to recommend refusal should not have changed either. The second is the Ash Lane new access route. The proposal includes a new third access onto Ash Lane. In reality, this is a second route, as the two at Forest Hills and Arthur Moody Drive are only 200 metres apart and feed onto the same narrow road. I've got 12. Okay, sorry. Ash Lane also ultimately feeds onto the Gunville Road and onto the Waverley roundabout. Sorry, that's completely thrown me now. We're astounded that a small building plot for a house is proposed to provide this route. The planning committee approved plans for a cul-de-sac on this site, and the houses were sold with that promise. The residents will assume the role of a management company of the common parts of the development, and they already pay an annual maintenance fee for the private road. There will be no option to enforce TROs if this route becomes dangerous. The developer proposes to fly in the face of the planning decision that this committee made and add misery to a second Gunville community. The route serves only 18 out of 149 properties, so the lessening effect on traffic on Broadwood Lane, Forest Hills and Arthur Moody Drive will be negligible. Island Road's condition prohibits the Ash Lane route to be used for construction traffic, yet its recommendation for refusal in 2021 stated, the proposed development by reason of vehicle movements both during the construction and operational phases would result in significantly adverse effects on the capacity of the local highway network, particularly in relation to Broadwood Lane, Forest Hills, Arthur Moody Drive and the junction from Gunville Road. If Ash Lane cannot be used, then that reason for refusal stands. There is no mitigation to the impacts of the development on Broadwood Lane et al. Or the junction with Gunville Road. Houses on Broadwood Lane, Forest Hills, Arthur Moody Drive, the road specifically mentioned by Island Road as being significantly and adversely affected, were built with inadequate parking provisions by today's standards, necessitating considerable on-street parking. The proposed developments are reliant on devastating TROs in a neighbourhood that has absolutely no parking alternative but these roads. All surrounding roads are oversubscribed and restricted, and expecting current residents to concrete over their gardens, if they're even large enough, is indefensible both financially and environmentally in an area prone to flooding and at a time when we are encouraged to maintain lawns and flora. This and restricting current parking directly contravenes Section 106, which requires plans that mitigate any impact of a development proposal on the local community and infrastructure. The third is the provision of parking bays on the new development. Initially, and we say initially as the route's dangerous nature makes further TROs inevitable, this proposal will remove on-street parking for 10 properties in Forest Hills, being 9 3-bedroom and 1 2-bedroom. Houses on the development will be provided with 2 parking spaces per 3-bedroom and 1 per 2. On this allocation, there should be an initial compensatory provision of 19 spaces. In fact, only 10 have been provisioned for, and some of these are over 100 metres from Forest Hills, with no measures proposed to ensure that they're available only to Forest Hills residents. Due to proximity, they will inevitably be used by the residents of the new properties, causing conflict, which again contravenes Section 106. They allow for no future proofing whatsoever, and where are the displaced vehicles to park when the double yellow lines go down before these spaces can be provided? There is negligible provision to compensate spaces that will be lost in Arthur Moody Drive due to necessary TROs. And we must remember that the TROs are not being implemented to support the safety of an existing development, as cited in the recent East Cowes case that caused public uproar. They are being imposed on an existing hardworking community purely to facilitate a brand new development. They are not fixing a problem, they are creating one that will increase as the road is already dangerous. This again contravenes Section 106 and cannot be deemed as mitigation. The 2021 decision to refuse remains the correct decision. There are also severe damaging environmental consequences of the proposed developments. The land is active farmland that shows the remains of this year's harvest when you visited, which incidentally was a working day when most of us and our vehicles were at work. To keep land such as this productive at these times of a worldwide food crisis remains essential. The land provides home and a hunting ground for a diverse range of animals such as dormice, hares, foxes, badgers and various raptors. At a time when the UK wildlife population is in crisis, having only 50.3% of our biodiversity left in the UK, the preservation of this habitat is essential. The Isle of Wight was designated a UNESCO biosphere in 2019. The citation for this says the Isle of Wight Biosphere Reserve is home to 140,000 inhabitants, making it the second most populous island in Northern Europe. The Isle of Wight has a strong tradition of environmental action with numerous projects and initiatives promoting environmental education and awareness, increased community engagement and healthier lifestyles and diets. The island is also developing ecotourism and working with universities and institutions to foster environmental innovation and attract new investment and testing new measures for climate change mitigation and adaptation. The current proposal has not demonstrated how it is compatible with any of these considerations. It is a greenfield site with no public transport provision and demonstrates no adequate measures for climate change mitigation or adaptation. It is our opinion that the proposal is in direct opposition to the principles of the citation for UNESCO Biosphere. Nothing in the plans adequately addresses this flood area. The whole landscape filters water to the Gunville Stream and onward to the Lutley Brook convergence. It is historically well documented that properties from Gunville through to Newport Quay have been subject to extreme flooding, and the watercourse is already under enormous pressure. Ash Lane still floods despite intervention to allow building on that site. The proposal includes 2 attenuation ponds as flood mitigation, which is claimed will serve as aesthetic and recreational areas. A Southern Water engineer indicated these would initially need to be 7 feet deep with a requirement for safety fences and accessibility. No evidence is presented that these have been scaled to allow for future climate change and according with the UNESCO Biosphere citation. We believe that the design of these ponds is inadequate even for current environmental conditions, with inadequate safety railings, steps and maintenance. Southern Water have stated that SUDs must be maintained in perpetuity. There is nothing to suggest how this will happen and how the residents will be protected. The capacity of the sewage system and its inability to cope with more demand is well documented. A definitive answer in respect to the foul water disposal capacity is essential, and an impact assessment completed for the inevitable roadworks and their chaotic and devastating effect on the community and the access of emergency vehicles. The subtly revised archaeological survey reaches the same conclusion as before when the applications were refused. This is an important heritage site, including remains of an Iron Age structure and community that requires a full archaeological survey. We believe this must be completed before any change of use of the field is allowed to avoid artefacts being missed or inadvertently destroyed, and the findings evaluated before any works commence, with the acceptance that a significant find may restrict or stop the change of use altogether. The suitability of the site ecologically and environmentally, along with parking, accessibility, safety, disruption to the resident community, adequate drainage, safe sewage system, etc., must be the driving factor of any decision, not targets or developer profits. The traffic survey is dangerously unreliable to support any reversal of your decision to refuse both applications previously. The woefully inadequate, the additional access road at Ash Lane offers no gain and the provision of parking bays is woefully inadequate and are merely the start of a programme of TROs that would be necessary yet completely and devastatingly unsustainable in the area. The council has not provided any indication of how it will enforce the inadequate mitigations proposed by the developer. In the absence of any real changes to the applications, these applications must rightly be refused again to support the homes, the safety and mental and physical well-being of the community. You made the decision to refuse both applications last year. Nothing meaningful has changed. My community, our community, the island community implores you to make that decision to refuse both applications again. The right decision. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mrs. Cook. Thank you very much. That was very good. I'm realising because we've got these 12-minute, the hybrid application, we've got 12-minute interventions. We're actually going to run out of time for this meeting, and we need an extension so we can continue beyond 7 o'clock. So I just want to check that people are still available for a 1-hour extension. I know that some of you can't make it. Yes. What's our quorum?
Chairman, what you look for here in the case of the constitution is that you do need a majority of the members present to vote in favour of an extension, and you need a motion to propose the extension for up to 1 hour in the first instance.
Councillor Brodie.
Chair, I propose an extension till no further than 8 p.m.
Can I have a seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Thank you. I think it's majority. We'll go on to, is it Councillor Ambrosini?
Yes, it is.
Okay, Councillor Ambrosini representing the Newport and Carisbrooke Community Council. Again, 12 minutes, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm grateful for the opportunity to speak on this matter. I'm here on behalf of Newport and Carisbrooke Community Council as the Vice Chairman of its Planning and Consultation Committee, as well as one of its 2 councillors for the Carisbrooke and Gunville ward. Many residents have actively voiced their concerns in relation to these applications via written objections and speaking to our elected representatives. It is clear as a resident of the area that there is great apprehension as to the impacts this development will bring upon the local community. As a newly elected councillor, I spoke nervously before this committee on an extremely similar application to the one found before us today, some 14 months ago. Now the developer and their representative here today will no doubt argue that the application today has changed greatly in comparison to the one rightfully refused last year. I'm glad that on this matter, we have common ground. The application has changed, and most definitely for the worse. The third access for this development onto Ash Lane spreads a negative impact onto yet another cul-de-sac that was never designed for this application. Whilst the third access has been framed as a silver bullet that should allow this revised application to go ahead, I argue, along with the residents of Gunville, that it achieves very little. The report by Island Road states a slight reduction in traffic on Broadwood Lane and its subsequent connecting streets when compared to the previous application of last year. Island Road forecasts the Ash Lane access will only take around 12% of the vehicle burden. This means that, like last time, TROs will be required on Broadwood Lane and its subsequent connecting streets. So whilst these residents will experience slightly less traffic than in comparison to the previous application, the residents will still end up with an unfair TRO put upon them. The TROs once again remove the on-street parking. While stated earlier, parking does indeed occur on both sides of Forest Hills at night. This is something I've witnessed living in the area for well over a decade. So that means that these 20 that I would count curbside parking spaces be removed. Whilst the development does supply parking, it totals less than these losses. In addition, there is no regulation as to the assignment of these spots, meaning those affected by the TRO have little hope of securing parking and certainly not near their homes, a fact that wouldn't be the case if this development doesn't go ahead. Some people may argue that these residents have on-street parking as a luxury, but for many in Gunville, they simply don't have the access to other forms of parking. But it's not just residents who rely on this curbside parking. Visitors, care workers, tradesmen, and all others rely on this curbside parking for access. The third access serves little purpose apart from widening the wound that this application creates onto yet more streets. The application changes Gunville for the worse, and without wishing to sound trivial, Gunville has its own unique community of residents who have in some cases known each other since day one so many decades ago. This spirit makes up a close-knit nature of Gunville, something that can be witnessed every Wednesday at Nellie's, a coffee and cake group in Gunville Methodist Church. The community has already welcomed 90 new housing units in recent years, but where is the line in the sand? Even if you ignore the disastrous TROs and its effect, or you dispute the little contribution of the Ashley Lane access, we still have the same wider problems as the previous application last year. I know many of you have families to get back home to on this Tuesday evening, but I would be doing a disservice to the people who elected me if I didn't repeat them today. Like last time, vehicle access to the site is insufficient and inappropriate for the expected traffic to the site. It is heavily reliant on Broadwood Lane. The roads in and near this area are already considered to be congested and let alone dangerous for both vehicles and pedestrians. I would like to note that the traffic counts made under COVID-19 restrictions. This surely entails inaccuracies in forecasting future traffic on these sites, as they were done under unique circumstances of limited vehicle movement. The development itself is car reliant. Whilst there is provision for a cycle track and a public footpath, houses on the development closest to the nearest bus stop can be a long walk away, especially when factoring different levels of mobility. The bus service, number 7, is hourly, unless a further walk, in which case the service is half hour, 38. Both these routes offer reduced service at non-peak times. For many, this walk and subsequent bus connections or the use of the cycle track may not be feasible. Surely this car reliance with the false veil of sustainable travel is contrary to DM17, sustainable travel of the core strategy. I note that our MP Bob Seeley states, these houses are situated on the periphery of Carisbrooke and involve a significant walk to Newport Town Centre, which will inevitably result in an increase in vehicular activity. He also states that Newport has an abundance of brownfield land that could be used for development instead. Then goes on to finally say that redevelopment of brownfield sites in Newport Town Centre would be a better support, would also be better used and would support green transport methods. It is important to note that the development eventually leads onto Gunville Road, the main arterial within the area. It carries both local and wider island traffic between Forest Road and Carisbrooke, with no road improvements such as the removal of the troublesome pinch point and ever-growing quantities of vehicles using the roads in high traffic times. The dual role of Gunville Road in being both a local and arterial street becomes untenable, especially for access to properties on the adjoining cul-de-sacs, 2 of which are used by this development. I mentioned previously the pinch point. Residents and other frequent users of this road can testify that the pinch point's relationship to Broadwood Lane is one of difficulty to say the least. At either ends of Gunville Road, we have junctions, one with Forest Road. This isn't one necessarily of concern, but at the other end, the Waverley Mini Roundabout is a junction for concern. It's already set to be exceeding its capacity at peak times by 2025, and therefore the approval of applications today would further impact on the capacity and in turn the highway safety of this roundabout. It is a notorious issue within my ward for both pedestrians and vehicles. Countless near misses and unfortunately some minor accidents do occur. The safety of this junction cannot be further compromised because of this development. My fellow members of Newport and Carisbrooke Community Council consider the application could be refused on the grounds of highway issues. I hope this committee will hold the same view as well. I feel that it is obvious to state that brownfield sites such as Camp Hill Prison would be better than that of Gunville's green fields. Access to the island's transportation network, be it private transit, frequent buses, walking and cycling, is far better catered for in a site like Camp Hill than with Gunville, with the addition of not degrading the safety of both Gunville's roads and the wider roads in Carisbrooke. The proposed site has several environmental issues. Their area is notoriously inadequate for sewer capacity, with no mention of improvement for the existing sewer network. Extra foul water and sewage may well lead to yet further pressure on the system. Potentially in deluge incidents, southern water facilities will be overwhelmed and forced to yet again discharge foul water and sewage into the River Medina, for which we all know the consequences. The proposed drainage scheme would potentially result in some dirty surface water discharging into the Gunville stream. This may have pollutants from the development, both during and after the building process, or the proposed drainage scheme would potentially result in surface water entering the southern water surface water system, which would therefore reduce what is currently flowed naturally into the local streams. Either of the two potential options leads to a negative change in the Gunville stream, and thus changing the conditions down the watercourse. This application is therefore contrary to policy DM14 of flood risk. The location of this application is already prone to flooding throughout much of the year. Local residents already experience this. Local fields are a natural barrier helping in controlling the worst of it. I have no doubt the current situation for residents will be made worse by an increase in impermeable surfaces and a decrease in natural absorption and interception. The proposed two dry ponds seem a poor decision. Placement isn't at or near the lowest point in elevation of the site, which would be sensible considering they're meant to catch excess surface water, helping to prevent issues of flooding further down a natural watercourse or in local residents' gardens. Changes to the watercourse as a result of this development will lead to a changed habitat within and around the waterways. These waterways are habitats for protected and vulnerable species, such as water voles, crested newts, bullheads, and otters. This is indicated by their spraint, and many other freshwater inhabitants. And other species rely on the local habitat and the environment it creates around it. The risk of this area from development is contrary to the work of the Environment Agency, ensuring the well-being of local species. Not only will this development negatively impact local wildlife and the local people, the loss of working agricultural land, given the current cost of living crisis and food security concerns, is yet another issue with this development. The proposed site has remains of a roundhouse and enclosure from the transition period from the late Iron Age to early Roman society. This is dated at around 200 BCE. Having been described as of significant value, it strikes me personally that this is, even if not of national importance, something that should be protected as part of the history of both Gunville and the Isle of Wight. I know many of you are long-standing politicians, so I don't wish to be patronising, but the fate of the community is here in the hands of your committee. I want you to remember that the decision made here today has real consequence. You can side with a small but strong community that has much to lose and very little to gain from this application, or you can side with the developer and contribute to the Gunville becoming yet another endless, soulless urban sprawl on the periphery of rural England that we see far too often across the country. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Councillor Ambrosini. That was very impressive. And so we go on to Mr. White on behalf of the agents. Yeah. Again, 12 minutes, please, Mr. White.
Thanks, Chairman. The Planning Committee refused both previous applications in August 2021, purely for highway-related reasons, on the basis of potential adverse effects on the capacity of the local highway network, including Broadwood Lane, Forest Hills, Arthur Moody Drive, and the junction onto Gunville Road. Concern was also expressed in relation to the capacity of the Waverley roundabout. Finally, it was stated that construction traffic would compromise the residential amenity of surrounding properties. Government advice relating to appeals encouraged applicants to make an amended application in order to address concerns, stating that appeals are seen as a last resort. Even though the Council's previous decisions were made against officer advice, the applicant has been keen to achieve a consensus where possible and has carefully addressed the concerns that were raised by members. Better information on the highway issues is now available, including up-to-date traffic surveys, and significant improvements have been made to the proposals in relation to a second point of access from Ash Lane and community parking to compensate for the loss of current street parking resulting from the required TRO. Government advice goes on to say that when refusing an application, the local planning authority should consider carefully whether it has a sufficiently strong case, capable of being argued at appeal on the basis of the material before it. Given the significance of the amendments made and the additional evidence gathered, duly supported by Ireland Roads as Highway Authority, we will assert that the local planning authority cannot sustain refusing permission on highway grounds. The planning officer's report identifies the key planning issues and deals with them in detail. It is not necessary here to dwell on wildlife, archaeology, flood risk, drainage, and so on, since they've all been resolved and where necessary conditions are to be imposed. Also, the previous applications were not refused for any of these technical matters, and circumstances have not changed in relation to these issues over the past 12 months for members to decide otherwise. However, looking at the previous refusals, additional comment on two specific issues will be useful, referred to by the planning inspector in appeals as the main issues. These being the general principle of building housing in this location and the highway implications. The previous applications for a total of 149 dwellings were refused, as I said, solely on highway-related grounds, thus recognising as a matter of broad principle that members considered the land to be appropriate and suitable for the amount of development shown in all other respects. The land is proposed to be allocated through the Island Planning Strategy. Whilst appreciating that there was divided opinion across the chamber regarding allocated sites, it was never proposed by the scrutiny committee that this particular site should be removed as a housing allocation. Even the local member, Councillor Lever, voted in favour of the island planning strategy at full council, including this as an allocated site. Members will clearly be aware of the presumption in favour of sustainable development and that the tilted balance must be engaged. The term tilted balance is extremely important, as it essentially changes the balancing exercise that the planning officer, planning committee and planning inspector make when deciding whether or not to grant planning permission or to allow an appeal. From a more neutral balance, where if the harm outweighs the benefits, planning permission is usually withheld, whereas the tilted balance weighs a development's adverse impacts against its benefits, not on a level playing field, but very much tilted towards granting planning permission, hence the tilted balance. To achieve the required housing delivery levels and relinquish itself from the presumption in favour of sustainable developments, the council must deliver a greater level of housing and or adopt an up-to-date planning strategy. It is a scheme like this, on the edge of a settlement, surrounded on three sides by housing and within a key regeneration area, that can make a big difference to the council's significant current shortfall. Therefore, in terms of the principle of development, the scheme would be in harmony with the existing island character, and the officer's report is right to say that the scheme would not appear prominent or at odds with the character of the area. See paragraph 715. At the same time, the project would provide much needed housing. As the officer's report confirms, paragraph 7.2, the island is woefully behind with its housing delivery land supply and scores very badly indeed on the National Housing Delivery Test. Significantly, this scheme would deliver 52 affordable homes, the majority of which will be socially rented, and the applicant is in advanced negotiations with Vexus Housing to bring these forward, thus providing homes for those most in need. It is recognised that the council have received letters from local residents who are opposed to change, but you must also consider those who will not write in support, because they are the ones who will live in the new homes, including affordable homes, when the new houses are delivered. The government is committed to building more homes, and the location is right in principle for this development. The council's own report summarises the position succinctly at paragraph 8.7, where it says the proposed development would provide much needed housing within an area of land with existing residential development on three sides, in filling an existing gap between recently approved developments in a highly sustainable location. This would minimise the impact on the character of the area. Onto the highway issue. The proposals have been re-evaluated and modified in the light of the latest traffic information. This has all been agreed with Island Roads as the Highway Authority. There is no technical objection to the proposals and no technical evidence is available to support a refusal. The applicant has negotiated a second point of access into the site from the north. The additional access route from Ash Lane will avoid concentrating all the traffic through a single junction and along Broadwood Lane. This will increase the options available for residents, as well as reducing the length of travel for service vehicles, such as refuse vehicles, that may need to visit both sites. This more permeable layout is in line with current design guidance in Manual for Streets. It will also allow uninterrupted emergency access into the area in the event of Broadwood Lane ever being blocked. This is a significant improvement in relation to the previously refused schemes. It is suggested by Island Roads that a condition be imposed in relation to securing a traffic regulation order, so that double yellow lines can be extended in certain nearby junctions, as explained by Ms Wilkinson. This would displace up to 15 on-street parking spaces. The applicant has confirmed that these spaces will be replaced just inside the application site, meaning that there would not be a net loss in street parking, and this accords with the council's policy relating to traffic regulation orders as adopted in July of this year. These replacement spaces can be secured by a pre-occupation condition. The revised scheme is also based on up-to-date survey data as collected in September 2021, with an appropriate growth factor applied to derive 2027 baseline flows. As requested by Island Roads, we've also included potential development traffic from this site and the other allocator site on the eastern side of Gunville Road. The combined flows have been used to undertake capacity testing using appropriate traffic modelling software. The results of this traffic modelling demonstrate that no capacity problems will arise at the survey junctions, including the Waverley. In short, we have new data, we have a new design, and based on the latest evidence, the Highway Authority find both applications to be acceptable. During the public this evening, discussion has taken place regarding the impact of the pandemic and how that relates to the additional traffic survey that has been taken. So it's already been pointed out that the September 2021 traffic surveys were carried out after national COVID lockdown restrictions were ended, so it can be taken as a fair reflection of the new normal. In this respect, it is worth noting that a reduction in peak hour flows has been recognised and accepted by the Planning Inspectorate elsewhere. In an appeal decision earlier this year, when a similar query was raised, the inspector said, "I acknowledge that the COVID-19 pandemic is likely to have had an effect on traffic flows in June 21, which could well explain the lower traffic flows recorded in the June 2021 surveys. However, there is no evidence before me to suggest that traffic has now returned to pre-pandemic levels or that it will in the future, particularly bearing in mind the changes in working practices." The reasons for refusal also state that the construction traffic would also compromise the residential amenity of surrounding properties. As pointed out in the officer report at 7.28, this matter can be dealt with through a condition requiring a construction management plan and suitable working hours, recognising that disruption from building processes is an inevitable consequence, but is only temporary and can be managed carefully during the build programme. The applicant is a well-known island contractor who has developed hundreds of new homes and has finely tuned techniques for doing so. On one of the current sites for 39 dwellings in a village environment, the applicant prepared a construction management plan in accordance with the condition. This was prepared by the Isle of Wight Building Safety Association and included measures such as site deliveries of plant, machinery, materials will, as far as reasonably practicable, be done outside of typical busy times, including school start and finish times where possible, but primarily not before 9:30 and not after 1600 hours. If necessary, any plant or heavy traffic movements necessary outside of the site will be under the strict control of a competent banksman. Similar measures can be deployed at this site. Whilst mentioning the applicant, DN Associates Limited, they have been trading since November 1999 and are an island-based contractor developer with a proven track record of developing quality housing for island needs, ranging from starter homes to retirement living throughout the years, utilising skillful local labour, local merchants, suppliers, furniture stores, carpet companies, etc., which forms a vital support to the island's economy. DN Associates have constructed in excess of some 724 new dwellings, including at least 132 affordable homes, working with developers, housing associations and individual clients during this time. They are committed and above all able to develop much needed timeless homes for the future of island residents with an exemplary track record, including this project, which is being considered here today for 149 dwellings. Coming through the design process are a further 164 dwellings, which should show their commitment to the construction industry throughout the island. Returning to the highway issue, the wider scheme would result in increased traffic onto the local highway. Subject to appropriate mitigation, this is not considered to result in an unacceptable impact on highway safety, and the loss of parking locally can be suitably mitigated. When considering the amendments made and the new evidence presented, members are politely requested to note two fundamentally important factors. Firstly, paragraph 111 of the NPPF, National Planning Policy Framework, states that development should only be refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. Secondly, your specialist highway advisors at Iron Roads are now supporting both applications and have therefore concluded that the development would not impact on highway safety and would most certainly not have a severe impact. The inescapable conclusion is that these two applications ought to be granted planning permission, especially in view of the additional NPPF presumption in favour of sustainable development and the tilted balance. A refusal would be extremely difficult to defend through the inevitable appeal process, and not only would this unnecessarily delay the delivery of much needed affordable housing, but it introduces other risks that cannot afford to be taken. Planning permission is proposed to be granted subject to conditions which the applicant has accepted. Of course, less onerous conditions or obligations might be imposed on appeal depending on national policies. In short, it is respectfully urged that the Council grants planning permission in accordance with national and local policies and on the basis of all of the technical evidence presented. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Mr. White. Very concise. Thank you very much. And I'd like to now invite Councillor Lever to speak on as the local member.
Thank you, Chair. Committee, I won't take up the 12 minutes. One, because Sue and Councillor Ambrosini have said their piece excellently, so I won't go over too much of that, but just to call out some pertinent points regarding your last decision. And I'm confident that today will be a straightforward decision for you, so I won't take the 12 minutes. I say that because nothing about the applications has improved upon the concerns that led to your previous rejections based on the unsuitable access and adverse impact on the local highways. In fact, so little progress has been made, and with zero consultation with myself or local residents, that I see these applications as no more than a roll of the dice and a waste of councillor and officers' time. Tonight, I think we've seen fear mongering that the committee cannot reject these applications, and also a calling out of myself for a vote entirely unrelated to these applications, even though we've had no contact outside of this committee. So what has changed this time around? Firstly, I'm astounded that Island Road's concerns regarding the Waverley mini roundabout appear to be washed away on the back of a single survey, a survey carried out, as others have said, admittedly not during a lockdown, but whilst we're still very much in the throes of a pandemic, something that continues today. And as we now start to feel the effects of a cost of energy and a cost of living crises, I suspect we'll see traffic numbers go up, and again as people opt for a warm office or public building rather than using their expensive home energy, something not accounted for in the report. Considering this and the fact that Island Road's rep at the previous committee stated the constraints on that area regarding Waverley mini roundabout mean there are no engineering solutions available, we should not risk knowingly increasing traffic hitting that area and potentially adversely impacting the local highway network when there is nothing we can do to remedy it should traffic numbers rise again. The second difference to note in these applications, as others have pointed out, is the addition of access via Ash Lane with regard to the outline element only. This is frankly an absurd solution to the committee's concerns around suitable access. It does nothing to make the Broadwood Lane and Forest Hills access suitable, particularly for the full element. If anything, it just adds to the disruption and inconvenience by bringing Ash Lane into the mix. Ash Lane, whose existing residents have already seen years of disruption due to the development at the rear of the road, and whose new residents purchased their property on the understanding that Ash Lane was a cul-de-sac and not a through road. Many committee members commented on the inadequate access last time round and was the major basis of your previous rejection, even if a TRO was achieved, and in my view, nothing has changed that. And on the matter of the TROs, as previously stated by the Island Roads rep at the time, they cannot be guaranteed because they go through a separate process with consultation, and if not approved, Island Roads would withdraw their support for approval. These applications rely too heavily on a risky TRO that would remove more parking for existing residents than is accommodated for in the new plans, something I think Sarah has clarified tonight. Therefore, I see absolutely no reason for the committee members to change their minds from the previous applications, and I expect to see both applications rejected should you apply a consistent ruling. Should you, for some reason, approve one or both of these applications, I request that condition be applied where parking bays supposedly for existing residents are reserved specifically for existing residents, as currently that is not stipulated, and if built, there is nothing to stop new residents using those spaces. I would also ask that the applicant contributes financially to improving the pinch point outside Broadwood Lane based on an IR recommendation, whether that's removal of the pinch point or something else. I'll leave that matter there and I'll let you get to your decision, committee. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Lever. We should all be aware of the fact we've got 50 minutes to make a decision. Obviously, this committee has had this discussion already in some detail, so I hope we can keep this fairly short. So I'm going to start taking who would like to speak. So Councillor Andre, anyone else? Councillor Quirk. Okay, no one else at the moment. So let me start with Councillor Andre.
Thank you, Chair. Just a point of order. I wasn't on the committee that originally considered this decision. So I come with a completely open mind on this and I reserve the right to speak, Chair. Thank you.
I'm certainly not telling you not to speak. I'm just saying be aware of the timing.
But you made the point that the committee had already that this
I wasn't here at that meeting either, so you know you're not alone. Quirk.
One of the major issues last time that this was considered was the road access. We now have a report from Island Roads that says this is all right. It's questioned by Councillor Lever. Island Roads, do you stand by the report?
Mr. Troughton?
The most up-to-date evidence which has been provided in the new supporting information in respect of these two applications indicates that the impacts which were shown to occur previously, based on current information, no longer occur. So we stand by our report that there is no evidence now to support a highway objection.
just an observation. I didn't grow up on the island. I grew up in London. I've nowhere on the island have I ever seen what you could really call a traffic jam.
That's an observation. Does anyone else, no one else wishes to speak? The Brody.
Okay. Yes, we considered this about 14, 15 months ago. I was one of those who voted against the two applications which were on highway and traffic reasons regarding broad, and also in terms of the outline regarding the Waverley. Our advisors are Island Roads. They have changed their position on the application. We have to have cognizance of that. I don't always have cognizance of Island Roads, but sometimes you have to. The Ash Road introduction of an access point is entirely new to this application. It does strike me that when people purchase properties, they shouldn't listen to developers, given them assurances that something will remain a cul-de-sac. We should make sure they get it in writing. I, as a representative of Pan and Barton, representing the biggest housing development on the Isle of Wight in a generation, the Pan Meadows development, constantly deal with residents who were promised such and such by the developer there, which never actually happened. And Ms. Wilkinson is raising her eyebrows, probably in agreement, I suspect. So my caseload is full of things like that, and I would advise anybody caveat emptor. We all know about that, surely. I've listened. I think the presentations by Mrs. Cook, who is not a personal friend. I used to work with her a long time ago, and she's always extremely articulate. Matthew Ambrosini is a new member of the Community Council who spoke excellently as well. Can I just stress that although I'm a member of the Community Council, I'm not on their planning committee. Neither is Councillor Oliver, who's also on the Community Council, so we are not predetermined in any way regarding this application. They both spoke excellently, but a lot of it seemed to be about parking. Now, as a Newport councillor, particularly one near the town centre, parking is another thing that I have lots of issues regarding, you know, in my caseload of people moaning and groaning about this council. And it strikes me at times that people seem to be more concerned about where they're going to put their car than people who need a decent home to live. It was suggested by one of the speakers that there are plenty of brownfield sites in Newport where these houses could be built. Of course, at the recent full council a few weeks ago, all those brownfield sites were in the draft island plan, but also so was this site and other sites in Gunville, I should stress, near Carisbrooke College. They're all there. The brownfield sites will be used as much as possible, but this government, not a government I support, requires us to deliver a certain number of homes. Now, the only thing I really I don't care about the number of homes. Well, you have to care about it because that's why we're in the tilted balance. But they tell us we need to build so many homes for every year in the next 15 years. What will always be my priority as an elected councillor, as a member of this committee, is the delivery of affordable housing to rent. And sadly, the only way in which we can deliver affordable housing to rent is by a percentage of a private development. From these two applications that we have before us, we would secure 52 affordable homes, 52 families with a decent roof over their head. Not worried about somewhere to park their car, which they presumably some people would like them to sleep in, but actually a roof over their head, human need, a hot meal and shelter. Absolutely crucial to human need. So, some of us are going to have to bite the bullet here. We live on the edges of towns. We will build on all the brownfield sites we have, such as the Camp Hill site eventually, if we get the permission from government. But some greenfield is going to have to be built on. And this is an application that I believe has addressed the issues that we as a council planning committee had 14, 15 months ago. I've got the minutes of that meeting in front of me, and all that was mentioned was highways. None of the other issues that the people have mentioned, that Mrs. Cook and Councillor Ambrosini have mentioned, none of those issues were reasons for refusal. The only reason for refusal was on the highways issues. I believe they've been addressed, Chair, and therefore I formally propose acceptance of this application, and I look for a seconder. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Quirk. Councillor Drew, you're also on my list, so we'd like to speak before we go into the debate.
No, I'm very happy to withdraw. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Andre, do you want to speak now or in the debate?
Yes, just a brief point, just to say that I think a recent study showed that the quality of our current housing stock on the island is quite substandard, to say the least. And retrofitting to bring those measures up, especially in light of the current energy crisis, is expensive. I think here we have an opportunity for new homes built to modern standards that will support people to keep energy bills low and, as Councillor Brodie alluded to, provide a basic need. And I'm confident, as I say, I wasn't on the original planning committee, but I am looking at it, the conditions imposed. I'm confident that the highway issues have been addressed, and I will be supporting this application, the approval of this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Andre. Councillor Spink.
I wasn't on the original committee either. I've really got two observations at this stage, which might be a question as well, I'm not sure. But under the planning history on page 63 of the bundle, there's a number of past approvals, which as I understand it, haven't yet been built, paragraphs 4.4 to 4.7. That's, if my maths is correct, a total of 122 houses in this same area, presumably therefore going on to Gunville Road. Have those houses been taken into account by Island Roads and the traffic increase that they will lead to?
Ms. Wilkins.
Thank you, Chairman. In terms, just to clarify, in terms of numbers, the development stipulated in the history are for the adjacent two sites, so the Avonton Manor View extension and the Ash Lane extension. So if it might be helpful if I re-show the slides, so bear with me one moment. And so it's the two areas outlined in yellow on those plans are those stipulated within the history section. So that is the proposed, the main consents are the ones stipulated within 4.6 and 4.7, which are the outline for 50 on Ash Lane and the approval for 22 on Avonton Manor View. I believe that's been increased by 3 recently. So there's a slight increase. I think it's probably 25 now. They're the combined. The other consents are the approved of reserved matters for elements of those permissions. So they're not additional to that. So we're looking at the 50 for Ash Lane and the approximately 25 now for Avonton Manor View. They have been considered within the submitted transport assessment that was provided as part of the application. Island Roads may wish to clarify their consideration of it further if they wish to. Ultimately, much of those developments are certainly now completed, and the roads are the traffic is effectively on the network, or the construction process was being undertaken, and therefore the construction traffic was taken into consideration. But I don't know whether Island Roads want to add to that, but they certainly were taken into account in terms of traffic generation. It's my understanding, but I will revert to Island Roads for that.
Mr. Charlton.
Yes, I can confirm in the recent transport assessment, they took account of both developments as committed development. There was a bit of debate about construction traffic rather than residential traffic, but because of residential traffic would have a bigger impact, they actually assumed residential traffic on the network rather than the construction traffic.
And the other question, if I may, please, and it may mean you're, I'm afraid, Sarah, going back to your slides, but can you just point out where the settlement boundary is? Because as I understand it, it's outside the settlement boundary, but adjacent to it.
Through the Chairman, thank you. What I'm actually going to do, rather than share my slides, is if you will bear with me one moment, I will share the plan of settlement boundary, because that's not in my slides, and it may be helpful for councillors to see that more specifically. So if you just bear with me one moment while I bring that up. Effectively, the site is immediately adjacent to the settlement boundary, so it actually runs directly alongside the western boundary of the site, so the outside edge of the site. But what I will do is bring that up so you have that specifically in plan form, so you're not looking at it, you're not simply just taking what I say. Bear with me, I am nearly there. We can't share your screen. Bear with me, I am very nearly there. I can't get that. No, no. Can't get rid of that. Yeah.
Chair, can I say, it is immediately adjacent to, I know
It's
that.
immediate.
It's immediately
I'm a new
adjacent to
board
the
councillor, I know the boundary,
therefore
pretty
it's
much everywhere. I accept the officer's word.
I can share now. I think the only issue we've got is I can't get rid of this side panel on my screen, and that was the problem I was having. So I apologise for this, but what you can see is this is the kind of site boundary. I don't know whether that. So you've got the entrance into the site is at the point of the cursor here, the proposed entrance off Forest Hills. This therefore is the site. The red line being at the settlement boundary, the black line being the key regeneration area boundary. So it's within the key regeneration area boundary and immediately adjacent to the settlement boundary.
Thank you. Are there any, Councillor Oliver?
Thank you, Chair. I want to come back to the archaeological survey. There was a small one done on the initial site that we're looking at, but for the outline site, there's no archaeological survey being done on that. I'm just concerned, obviously, where you got an Iron Age, possible Iron Age construction up there. If we pass both sections now, and it suddenly kicks up that there is an Iron Age development within that site, where do we go from there? Because we're basing everything on a joint site rather than a single site.
Because we're advised on conditions there.
Chairman, thank you, Chairman. Yes, in essence, there was a survey done for the whole site, for the outline area and the full area. There was only trial trenching done for the full area, which is where the differentiation comes. Our council archaeology team were happy that it was only required for the full element because that set the layout. So it was considered appropriate that that was predetermination, and we undertook that before we came to committee for the previous application. For the outline application, archaeology was satisfied that that could be covered by a condition because it would be put, the layout's not set. So if something significant was found, then the layout could be amended if necessary, but it was more likely that any finds could simply be removed and preserved. I have clarified the point with our archaeologists since, because obviously there have been a significant number of objections part of this application raising that point. And she has clarified for me that the reference to the roundhouse is effectively what's termed a ring ditch. So it is a ring ditch. The features of the ditches and the features that are found on the survey are ditches and gullies, which are heavily truncated. So they could simply be a ditch gully, or they could be something more significant like a roundhouse. So from archaeology's perspective, it's not significant enough in terms of what the results showed to justify predetermination trenching for the larger site. And that is why they're satisfied that it can be covered by the conditions that are outlined in the permission for further survey work and a watching brief once the principle of the consent has been granted. Thanks, Chairman.
Thank you. And Councillor Jarman, I believe you wanted to ask a question. Oh, sorry, I beg your pardon. You want to continue there, Councillor Oliver?
Yeah, sorry, if I can, yeah, it's not supplementary, it's a separate one. I am concerned about the spaces, the planning spaces or parking spaces, sorry. You know, it's one of those sort of chicken and egg scenarios. We can't have the parking spaces until construction has started. We've got TROs in place by at that stage before anything can happen. We've already lost at least 15 parking spaces with no, reciprocal basis of where they're going to go. It's whether we can make that a condition that the parking spaces are sorted out is one of the first parts of the development. If that's what happens, it's one of those difficult ones for me. Yeah, and as much as I totally agree with Councillor Brodie with the affordable homes, we need to get those on the system. There's no question on that at all. 52 affordable homes. I'm just concerned that we're sort of rushing into this in as much as we're coming to this where we have to make a decision, because if we don't, it's going to go to appeal and then it will get decided anyway. So I would rather look at it from the other side and say, okay, let's get some conditions which suit us as residents of Newport, and bring that into play. Certainly the pinch point at is a major issue. So to be honest, the junction leading into Broadwood Lane needs to be sorted. Is part of the condition of this this development. But I think the fear of being overturned at appeal, which is probably a 90% chance of that happening, I think we need to get this right and get the decent conditions for the residents who are going to be living there and will live there in the future.
Councillor Oliver, in a way, you're amending the motion, aren't you? In a sense, you're suggesting an amendment. Okay, because I'm getting a bit confused here.
That's fine. Sorry, if I can just clarify, if I can draw Councillor Oliver your attention to condition 19, which is page 106 of the bundle, which says prior to the removal of any parking within the existing network in association with condition, and if you recall, that should be condition 14, not condition 13, and minimum of 11 spaces shall be provided in accordance with details to be submitted to and agreed. I think what we would be looking at doing in order to I agree with your point that if you're losing them at day one, then you can't provide them 3 years later. So we'd be looking at either having a scheme for them to be provided in line with the layout day one, or in the same way that you would have contractor parking, there would be an area of parking straight away to mitigate for those 11 as part of that phase and the remaining 4 as part of the later phases, in order to ensure that that provision was made before any were removed from the network.
You also had a point about the pinch points in Gumbill Road, which I thought was relevant too.
In response to that, it's a slightly challenging one for me to reply to be honest, councillors, because we have an application on the other side of the road, which was deferred by this committee because it sought to remove the pinch point, and councillors at that point did not want to see the pinch point removed, so asked officers to go away and negotiate an alternative option to removing the pinch point. So it's I will phrase my answer carefully, but certainly this application does not seek to remove the pinch point. And as a council, we have previously indicated we did not necessarily wish to see it removed, but it is potentially a point for negotiation for the application on the opposite side of the road. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Jarman?
Thank you, Chair. It may be that Sarah wants to lift her pen and just make a few notes. I've just got a multi-question here. The first one I'd like to clarify is on the conditions. How can we ensure within the conditions that the additional parking spaces provided on a long-term basis are dedicated to the exclusive use of those residents in the road who are affected? The second one is, am I correct that within the totality of this proposed development, there are no dedicated cycle lanes at all? The third one is, how can we ensure in the conditions that the residents of Ash Lane are not adversely affected in terms of the management company by carrying an additional burden for the enablement of the access to this site? And the fourth one is, to be very explicit, out of the 52 affordable properties, how many of those each will be 1 and 2 bedroom properties at the benefit level of rent, i.e. circa 495 to 625?
Right, thank you. In terms of how can we ensure additional parking are exclusively dedicated to the existing affected residents, the answer is we cannot. The current on-road parking is not dedicated to the existing residents. It is generic on-road parking. So in the same way the proposed parking would be generic parking spaces, we could not dedicate them to particular houses unless they purchase that parcel of land by some agreement. But there's no requirement within the planning consent that we would do that. I would advise that it would be impossible to enforce. And so it's not something that we would recommend. Within totality of the development, there are no cycle lanes. No, that's incorrect. There are, as stated within the update paper and indicated when the plans were shown, which I can reshare, but my notes are on my screen, so bear with me. There is the cycle track along the entire, or the cycleway along the entire northern boundary of the site, the western boundary of the site, apologies. And then there is a 3 metre wide cycle track, cycleway or footway cycleway running east to west through the site. I'm happy to share the plan and show that if necessary again.
Sorry, to clarify, I meant alongside the roads for people who were cycling along the road rather than
yes,
driving.
Absolutely. Let me show the plan. Is probably the easiest way to do it. So we have a cycle track that runs along the western boundary of the site, as I said. I accept that doesn't run along the side of the road. What we do have is a 3 metre wide cycle track running all the way down at the point of the cursor, which follows the road all the way down to the junction with Broadwood Lane, or Forest Hills, apologies. Broadwood Lane. At this point, there's also a link through the site to go through here and then through here, or through here to get to the link to the cycle track. This is also a cycle track, which would give you links to the cycle track onto Abington Manor View. And there is a link at this point of the site to link you to the remainder of the West White cycle track. So hopefully that clarifies at that point. Apologies.
The other roads in the site have no cycle lanes on them at all?
Correct. They are residential streets in essence. In terms of how do we ensure residents of Ash Lane aren't affected by additional burden of this site, that is a civil matter effectively, but I have, as outlined in the report, the proposed agreement between the developers, the landowner and the developer, or the landowners and the developers, is that the residents of this development would contribute towards the maintenance of Ash Lane in the same way that the existing residents of Ash Lane do. And that would be a requirement as part of the deal of connecting through. But it is a civil matter between the two parties as the road is not adopted. But there is provision for that, as outlined within the report. How many affordable houses would be affordable rent in terms of the proportions? Certainly, I may need to come back to you on the specifics of some of that, but I can confirm that the application would seek to be 40, in line with the core strategy, apologies, the application would seek to provide 70% of the 35 to be rented and 30% to be other means of affordable housing. Because elements of it are solely outline, we don't have the specifics of the set out of which one's a 1 bed, which one's a 2 bed in terms of that affordable housing provision. That is something we would agree later. Although we, if members are minded, we can stipulate that we want a percentage of those to be 1 bed and 2 bed. In terms of the rental value of them, it is not something I would generally suggest planning could control, the rent value of a property, because that is market dependent. And so I couldn't specify that they would be under a particular rate of rent.
So we can't specify that they would be affordable to rent for islanders at the benefits level, i.e. payable by the people who we want to take off the housing list and provide homes for.
Through the Chairman, thank you. What we would do as standard as part of the Section 106 agreement, which would require 35% to be affordable housing, we would stipulate that there would need to be a local lettings, effectively a local lettings plan as part of that process, or we don't use local lettings plans anymore. It would effectively be an occupancy restriction that they are to island residents in the first instance. We would do the standard one that councillors have used before, and I think we've read out before, which results in it would first go to Gunville residents and then to adjoining parishes, and we would work through until it went to island-wide. And that the application would, the 106 agreement would also require the units to be marketed on Home Finder, which is effectively the council's housing register. And I think covered by Mr. White in his discussion, the units are being, the developer is in detailed discussions with Vectors Housing, so it is one of our housing associations who would be providing those units.
Thank you, Ms. Wilkinson. Is there anybody else who wishes to speak before we go to the vote? Mr. Guard, you want to say something?
Thank you, Chairman. I'll be very, very quick, mindful that the motion has been put and has been seconded. Just for absolute clarity, the motion is for both planning permit in relation to both planning permissions, and it is approval in accordance with officer recommendation. Is that correct, Councillor Brilliant? Councillor Quirk, who seconded? Thank you. Thank you, Chairman.
I see those in favour of the motion, please.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
I see those in against the motion, please.
1, 2, 3.
Motion is carried. Oh, I don't think there are any abstentions, are there? Oh, me, of course, yes. Chair's prerogative. Thank you. Motion is carried. We move on to the last item on the agenda, which is, oh no, yes, it is. It's members' question time. Should just wait a second to let people out the building, because it's being a bit disruptive.